most powerful mental models for life. First principles thinking. This is one of the most powerful mental models for understanding reality. It allows you to cut through assumptions, get to the core of a problem, and build solutions from the ground up. Most people rely on borrowed thinking. They do what others have done, make small tweaks, or follow standard rules. That might work for simple tasks. But when the challenge is new, complex, or broken, copying the past usually fails. First principles. Thinking starts by asking, what do I know for sure? What are the basic facts, independent of trends, habits, or opinions? Once you've got those, you rebuild from scratch. Here's a simple example. Imagine you're trying to eat healthier. Most people look up popular diet plans or follow what worked for someone else. But first principles thinking asks, what does my body actually need to function well? At the most basic level, it needs enough protein, vitamins, energy, and hydration. Once you understand those needs, you can build a diet that works for you, regardless of fads, labels, or influencers. This way of thinking changes how you approach everything: health, work, money, even relationships. It makes you ask better questions. It forces you to stop leaning on defaults and start thinking clearly. It's not about being a contrarian. It's about getting to what's real. Because when you understand the fundamentals, you don't just copy what works. You understand why it works. That gives you power, not just to follow, but to innovate. First principles. Thinking won't make decisions for you, but it gives you something better, clarity. And in a noisy world, that might be the most valuable tool of all. Second-order thinking. Some decisions feel right in the moment, but end up causing problems later. That is where second-order thinking comes in. Second-order thinking is a mental model that helps you look beyond the immediate outcome of a decision and consider what might happen next. Instead of stopping at the first effect, you ask what that effect might lead to. This kind of thinking helps you anticipate long-term consequences and avoid unintended results. For example, imagine a company cuts prices to attract more customers. First-order thinking says lower prices equal more sales. But second-order thinking asks what happens after that. Maybe the profit margin shrinks. Maybe competitors drop their prices too, leading to a price war. Maybe the brand becomes associated with cheapness, which hurts its long-term image. What seemed smart at first could turn out to be damaging. This model applies to everyday life too. Suppose you stay up late to finish a project. First-order thinking says you met the deadline. But second-order thinking considers the impact of lost sleep. Will your focus drop tomorrow? Will that lead to more mistakes or missed opportunities? The goal is not to overthink every decision. It is to slow down enough to consider more than just the immediate win. Many of the worst outcomes in history, from failed policies to financial crises, happened because people only looked one step ahead. Second-order thinking does not require advanced knowledge. It just takes the habit of asking, and then what? Over and over until you see the bigger picture. It helps you make choices that are not just good today, but still make sense tomorrow. In a world full of quick fixes and short-term rewards, this kind of thinking gives you an edge that most people overlook. Probabilistic thinking. Most people want a clear answer, yes or no, right or wrong, win or lose. But the real world rarely works like that. Probabilistic thinking is a mental model that helps you deal with uncertainty. Instead of asking, will this happen or not? It asks, how likely is this to happen? It is about thinking in terms of chances and weighing possibilities instead of relying on black and white outcomes. Imagine you were planning a picnic. The weather forecast says there is a 30% chance of rain. That does not mean it will rain or it won't. It means there is a 3 in 10 chance you will get wet. A lot of people ignore that and plan as if it is definitely going to be sunny or definitely going to storm. Probabilistic thinking means you prepare for both and manage the risk. This mindset becomes even more important when the stakes are high. A business might launch a new product knowing there is a 60% chance of success, but also a 40% chance of failure. That does not mean they made a bad decision if it fails. It just means they took a calculated risk. Over time, consistently making decisions based on good probabilities is what leads to success. Probabilistic thinking also helps avoid emotional overreactions. If something unlikely happens, like a rare event or a freak accident, it does not always mean you made a bad call. It just means you were playing the odds, and sometimes the odds don't break your way. This kind of thinking requires practice. It means getting comfortable with uncertainty, using data when possible, and making peace with the fact that good decisions can still lead to bad outcomes. It is not about predicting the future perfectly. It is about playing the game wisely over time. Feedback loops. When you speak into a microphone and hear your voice echo back through the speakers, you're experiencing a feedback loop. A feedback loop happens when the output of a system is fed back into the system as input. In simple terms, it's when the result of an action influences what happens next. This might sound technical, but feedback loops are everywhere, in nature, in technology, in personal habits, and in society. There are two main types, positive and negative. A positive feedback loop amplifies change. For example, when a microphone picks up its own sound from a speaker, the noise grows louder and louder until it screeches. In nature, melting ice exposes dark ocean water, which absorbs more heat and melts more ice. The cycle accelerates itself. A negative feedback loop does the opposite. It stabilizes. Think of a thermostat. When the room gets too hot, the air conditioning turns on. When it cools down, the system shuts off. The goal is balance. In biology, your body uses negative feedback to regulate temperature, blood sugar, and countless other functions. Feedback loops also shape human behavior. If you study, do well on a test, and feel proud, you're more likely to study again. That's a reinforcing loop. But if you touch a hot stove and feel pain, you learn not to repeat the action. That's corrective feedback. In either case, your actions adapt based on results. Understanding feedback loops is essential for improving systems. They explain how habits form, how businesses scale, and how environmental systems shift over time. Without feedback, there's no learning, no adjustment, and no progress. But with the right kind of feedback, change becomes guided, responsive, and sustainable. In any evolving system, feedback loops are the mechanism that makes adaptation possible. Law of diminishing returns. The first time you go to the gym after months of sitting at a desk, the changes can feel dramatic. A little effort leads to noticeable results, but keep going for months or years, and each improvement becomes smaller and harder to earn. That's the law of diminishing returns. It's a simple but powerful idea. When you invest more effort, time, or resources into something, your gains won't always increase at the same rate. At first, the returns are high. Then they begin to slow down. Eventually, you hit a point where adding more gives you very little in return. Imagine watering a plant. A few cups of water help it grow. But once the soil is saturated, more water doesn't make the plant grow faster. It just overflows. The same logic applies to learning a new skill, building a product, or even improving a business. At the start, there's a lot of low-hanging fruit, easy wins that create big improvements. But as the system becomes more refined, each new tweak matters less. You can keep pouring in energy, but the payoff shrinks. This idea helps explain why perfection is so expensive. Getting something from 90% to 95% might take as much effort as it did to get from 0 to 90. That final push often costs the most and gives the least. The law of diminishing returns isn't about giving up. It's about knowing when the trade-off stops being worth it. It helps you make smarter decisions about where to invest effort, when to shift focus, and how to avoid chasing improvements that no longer matter. In any system, knowing when returns begin to shrink lets you manage time, energy, and resources with far more clarity. Inversion. People try to reach their goals by asking what they need to do. But there's another approach that's often more effective. Ask what to avoid. Inversion is a mental model that flips a problem on its head. Instead of only thinking forward, you also think in reverse. If the goal is success, inversion asks what would cause failure. If the goal is happiness, inversion asks what creates misery. It works by focusing on what not to do, which is often more obvious and easier to control. This kind of thinking is useful because we're often too focused on ideal outcomes. We imagine what we want, but ignore the obstacles that stop people from getting there. Inversion brings those blind spots to the surface. It is a practical way to avoid common mistakes before they happen. For example, if you want to run a successful meeting, most people plan the agenda and talking points. Inversion asks what would ruin the meeting, maybe showing up unprepared, dominating the conversation, or not listening. Avoiding those things could be just as important as what you include. It applies across all kinds of decisions. Athletes use it to identify habits that lead to injury. Startups use it to predict what might cause them to fail. Even in relationships, you can use inversion to avoid behaviors that damage trust. Inversion does not mean you only focus on the negatives. It means you balance your thinking by working from both directions. Forward thinking shows you what to aim for. Inversion shows you what to steer away from. The two together create a clearer path. By removing the obvious sources of failure, inversion often reveals what really matters, long before the consequences arrive. It is a simple shift in mindset, but one that changes how problems are solved. Occam's razor. When something goes wrong, people often jump to the most complicated explanation. But more often than not, the simplest answer is the right one. Occam's razor is a mental model that helps you cut through confusion. It suggests that when you're faced with multiple explanations for the same thing, the one with the fewest assumptions is usually the most accurate. It's not about being lazy or ignoring complexity. It's about not adding extra layers unless you really need to. Let's say your internet stops working. One explanation is that the entire service provider's infrastructure has failed. Another is that your Wi-Fi router just needs to be restarted. Occam's razor would tell you to start with the second one. It's simpler, it relies on fewer assumptions, and in most cases, it turns out to be correct. This kind of thinking is useful because people love complex stories. We often overcomplicate problems, not because the situation demands it, but because our brains like patterns, drama, or hidden meanings. Occam's razor helps counter that tendency by reminding us to keep our reasoning grounded. In science, the model plays a huge role. If two theories predict the same result, scientists prefer the one that is simpler and cleaner, as long as it still fits the evidence. The same idea applies in business, medicine, and everyday problem solving. Occam's razor is not a guarantee that the simplest idea is always true. It's just a rule of thumb that keeps you from adding unnecessary explanations too soon. It helps you focus on what is most likely instead of getting lost in what is merely possible. In a world full of noise, this kind of clarity makes decisions faster, reasoning sharper, and thinking more reliable. Leverage. A small push can move something big, if you apply it in the right place. That's the essence of leverage. Leverage is the idea of using limited effort to produce a much greater result. In physics, it's clear. A lever, a pulley, or a gear turns a small input into a big outcome. You apply force at the right point, and the system multiplies it. But leverage isn't just about mechanics. It's a way of thinking that applies to work, learning, technology, and decision-making. A single coder can write a program used by millions. One well-timed investment can generate massive returns. An effective leader can direct the energy of an entire organization with a few strategic moves. These are all examples of leverage at work, where effort gets amplified through systems, tools, or people. There are many forms of leverage. Financial leverage uses borrowed money to increase potential returns. Labor leverage relies on people, delegating tasks or leading teams. And then there's technology leverage, which uses software, automation, or machines to extend your impact far beyond what you could do alone. Used well, leverage saves time, increases efficiency, and turns good decisions into extraordinary outcomes. But there's a downside. Just as leverage multiplies gains, it also multiplies mistakes. A bad investment, an overextended loan, or an over-automated system can cause damage far greater than the original risk. That's why leverage requires judgment. It works best when you understand the system you're influencing and when you account for second-order effects, those ripple consequences that might not be obvious at first. Leverage is not about doing more. It's about doing what matters most and letting tools, teams, or systems amplify the result. When used carefully, it becomes one of the most powerful forces for progress in any field. Bottlenecks. Every system has a weakest point, a place where progress slows, frustration builds, and everything backs up. That's the bottleneck. A bottleneck is the part of a system that limits how fast the whole thing can operate. It might be a single step in a manufacturing process, a person in a team who's overwhelmed, or a slow connection in a data network. No matter how fast the rest of the system moves, everything still has to pass through that narrow opening. It's a simple concept, but its impact is massive. If you want to improve how something works, the most effective place to start isn't by speeding up everything. It's by identifying and improving the bottleneck. This is the foundation of the theory of constraints. The idea is straightforward. The slowest part of the system sets the pace for everything else. Fix that, and you'll see the biggest gains. Bottlenecks can also shift over time. You solve one, and another appears in a different part of the process. That's why systems need regular review. What worked yesterday might be what's holding you back today. But not all bottlenecks are problems. Sometimes they exist for a reason. A security checkpoint delays passengers, but it also protects them. A review step in a publishing process slows down output, but ensures accuracy. In cases like these, the bottleneck is a safeguard, not a flaw. Understanding bottlenecks helps you think clearly about efficiency, priorities, and flow. It's not about removing every obstacle, it's about knowing which ones matter. By focusing on the true constraint, you can create the most impact with the least effort. Unwritten rules of life. Listen to understand, not to reply. The most common unwritten rule of life is one most people quietly break is listening not to understand, but to respond. You've probably felt it. You're talking, explaining something real, and the other person is already forming their reply. not out of malice, just habit. It's how most of us were taught to communicate, respond quickly, have a point, make it count. But the real power in a conversation isn't in having the next word. It's in giving someone the space to finish theirs. Listening to understand means dropping the need to be right or clever. It's about tuning in, not just to what's said, but how it's said. The pace, the tension, the pauses. That's where the meaning lives. Take a simple example. Someone says, "Work's been overwhelming lately." A response-driven habit kicks in. "Ugh, same here." The topic bounces back to you. But a more generous move would be to stay with them. "What's been going on?" That small difference shifts the whole tone, from competition to connection. Psychologically, this kind of listening creates safety. It lowers defenses. It builds trust. When someone truly feels heard, they don't need to raise their voice or repeat themselves. They relax. They open up. And they carry that moment with them. Because they weren't just answered. They were understood. Timing matters more than truth. The truth can be solid, clear, and even helpful. But say it at the wrong moment, and it can land completely wrong. That's the idea behind timing matters more than truth. In psychology and everyday life, what you say often matters less than when you say it. It's not about lying or withholding important information. It's about understanding emotional readiness. When someone is overwhelmed, exhausted, or emotionally raw, they're often not in a state to process even the most reasonable feedback. In those moments, dropping a hard truth can feel more like an attack than support. Take this example. Right after someone receives bad news, you might feel the urge to offer perspective. Everything happens for a reason, or you'll come out stronger. These statements may be sincere, but when said too soon, they often come across as dismissive. The person isn't ready to zoom out, they're still in it. Psychologically, this is tied to emotional regulation. Our brains need time to calm down before we can process complex or abstract ideas. If you give people insight while they're still emotionally flooded, they won't absorb it. They'll just react. The same rule applies in conflict. Offering an honest critique right in the heat of an argument might be truthful, but it won't be useful. Waiting until both sides are calmer increases the chance that the message will be heard and understood. Knowing the right time to speak is a skill, and a powerful one. It means reading the emotional temperature of a moment, recognizing when someone's still processing, and choosing to wait instead of rushing in. Because even the most well-intended truth needs the right conditions to take root. Don't tease someone who's already shrinking. Some jokes land, others hit like a quiet slap. Teasing might seem harmless, just part of how people bond. But when someone's already feeling small, self-conscious, or unsure, that same joke can echo louder than intended, and instead of bringing connection, it creates distance. This idea, "don't tease someone who's already shrinking," points to a basic truth of social dynamics. Context matters more than content. A comment that's funny in one setting can be painful in another, especially when it reinforces the very thing someone is trying to hide or recover from. Psychologically, people who feel insecure or exposed are already in a defensive mental state. Their stress response is subtly activated, and their internal voice is often running critical commentary. A well-meaning tease about their mistake, their hesitation, or their silence doesn't challenge that voice. It amplifies it. You'll often see this in group settings. Someone stumbles through a story, and instead of support, they get a joke at their expense. Laughter follows, but their shoulders tighten. They shrink a little more. The group doesn't always notice, but they do. What makes teasing feel safe is reciprocity and emotional balance. When someone feels grounded and included, they can laugh at themselves because it doesn't feel like a threat. But when someone is already withdrawing socially, emotionally, or physically, a joke about them isn't banter, it's pressure. Psychological safety depends on knowing when to lean in and when to ease off, and noticing when someone is already pulling away is a sign of empathy, not oversensitivity, because the goal isn't to toughen them up. It's to make space where they don't have to be tough at all. Kindness is doing, not offering. Most people want to be kind. They'll say things like, "Let me know if you need anything," or "I'm here if you want to talk." But in practice, those offers rarely turn into action. And that's what this idea gets at. Kindness is doing, not offering. From a psychological standpoint, offering kindness feels good to the giver. It checks a box. I said something supportive. But to the person on the receiving end, especially if they're stressed or struggling, a vague offer can feel like one more task to manage. It requires them to identify a need, find the right way to ask, and risk feeling like a burden. Kindness becomes more meaningful when it skips the offer stage and moves straight into something practical. If a friend is having a hard time, don't just say, "Let me know if you need anything." Show up with a meal, text them a playlist, water their plants. These small, concrete actions are easier to receive and far more impactful. Psychologically, this is tied to a concept called social friction, the little barriers that make it harder for someone to accept help. Vague offers create friction because they shift the work back onto the person who's already depleted. Doing something specific lowers that barrier completely. This principle also shows up in group settings. Saying someone should check in on them doesn't help as much as actually making the call. Words of support matter, but action delivers the real relief. Kindness that's visible, physical, and low pressure makes people feel genuinely cared for. And often, it's not the size of the gesture that matters. It's that someone noticed and acted without waiting to be asked. That's when kindness really lands. Silence is room to breathe, not a gap to fill. There's a pause in the conversation, and suddenly it feels uncomfortable. So you jump in, say something, anything, just to break the silence. It's a common reflex, but one that often cuts a moment short before it's had time to breathe. The idea that silence is room to breathe, not a gap to fill, is rooted in how our brains process information and emotion. In conversations, especially emotionally charged ones, people often need a few seconds to reflect, compose their thoughts, or simply feel what they're feeling. That silence isn't empty. It's doing important work. But because many of us are conditioned to view silence as awkward or a sign that something's gone wrong, we rush to fill it. We change the subject, offer quick advice, or add unnecessary commentary. In doing so, we can unintentionally interrupt someone's processing or pressure them into responding before they're ready. Think about a moment when someone shared something personal. If they paused for a few seconds, it didn't necessarily mean they were done. It meant they were still unfolding what they wanted to say. Letting that pause happen can feel uncomfortable, but it allows the other person to stay with their thought instead of switching gears prematurely. Psychologically, silence is part of communication. It gives people space to feel safe, especially when they're being vulnerable. It signals that there's no rush, no demand to perform, and that you're there not just to hear, but to listen. In relationships, therapy, or everyday conversation, the ability to sit with silence, even a few seconds longer than feels natural, can completely change the tone of an interaction. It shows patience, presence, and emotional maturity. And more often than not, what follows that quiet moment is exactly what needed to be said. Be always humble about success. Success can make people listen to you, but humility makes them respect you. Being consistently humble about success isn't about pretending you didn't work hard or minimizing what you've achieved. It's about how you carry that achievement in a room, in a conversation, or in someone else's story. Psychology points to a subtle but powerful truth. People are more receptive to those who succeed without needing to remind others of it. There's a concept called status signaling, which describes the ways people show their place in a social hierarchy through clothes, speech, or behavior. But studies show that people tend to trust and connect more deeply with those who don't constantly signal their status. In fact, those who highlight their flaws or failures alongside their strengths often come across as more authentic. Humility also leaves space for others. When someone shares credit, admits what they don't know, or stays curious despite being accomplished, it shifts the dynamic from competition to collaboration. That alone builds psychological safety, the kind of environment where people feel free to speak up, take risks, and grow. Think about how success stories are told. When someone says, "I got lucky, but I also stayed prepared," it feels grounded. It acknowledges effort while leaving room for context, timing, support, even failure. That honesty makes the success feel more real, not less. And socially, humility acts like gravity. People are drawn toward those who lift others up without inflating themselves. Not because it's performative, but because it shows emotional intelligence. At its core, staying humble about success doesn't mean shrinking yourself. It means being large enough to not need to prove it. Assume there's a hard first draft behind every "I'm fine." Someone says "I'm fine," but their voice is flat, their shoulders are tense, and they won't meet your eyes. You nod, maybe smile, and move on. But deep down, you know something doesn't feel right. The idea behind "assume there's a hard first draft behind every "I'm fine" is rooted in how people cope with difficult emotions. When someone says those two words, it's often not the full truth. It's the version that felt safe enough to say out loud. In psychology, this is related to emotional filtering. People don't always express what they're really feeling, especially when those feelings are complicated, raw, or still being sorted out. "I'm fine" is often the placeholder, something that buys time, or protects the speaker from going deeper before they're ready. Think of it like writing. The first draft isn't polished. It's messy, hesitant, sometimes full of half-formed thoughts. The same goes for expressing pain. When someone says, "I'm fine," they might really mean, "I don't know how to talk about it yet," or "I'm not sure how you'll respond." This doesn't mean you need to pry or push. What it means is, listen more carefully, pay attention to tone, body language, or patterns in behavior. If you respond with patience and presence, not pressure, it becomes easier for the real story to come out over time. People often reveal themselves in layers, especially when they're hurting. And behind that short phrase might be something important they haven't figured out how to share yet. By assuming there's more beneath the surface, you stay open to what matters most. Not the words themselves, but the effort it took to say anything at all. Decline like you'd want to be declined. Nobody likes being told no, but how it's said makes all the difference. That's the idea behind decline like you'd want to be declined. In psychology, it's a principle rooted in empathy and social reciprocity, treating others the way you'd want to be treated when roles are reversed. A decline doesn't have to be harsh, dismissive, or awkward. In fact, A thoughtful no can actually strengthen trust because it shows honesty with care. It's not just about saying no, it's about how you say it. When someone asks for help, time, or inclusion, and you can't say yes, the delivery matters. A vague or abrupt "I can't" can feel like rejection of the person, not just the request, but a response like, "I really appreciate you thinking of me. Right now, I can't commit, but I'd love to be involved another time," delivers the same message with clarity and respect. This applies across situations, work, friendships, invitations. Declining with warmth and specificity shows that you're not avoiding the person, just the task or timing. Psychologically, this helps preserve relational trust. The sense that even when boundaries are drawn, the connection still matters. And it works in reverse too. When you decline kindly, you model how you'd want someone to respond to your own requests. This sets a tone for mutual understanding in future interactions. From a behavioral perspective, practicing thoughtful declines also helps reduce people-pleasing patterns. It proves that boundaries don't have to be cold or guilt-ridden. They can be clear and compassionate. Ultimately, saying no is part of life. But when done with empathy and respect, it becomes more than a refusal. It becomes a message of mutual dignity. And that's something people remember far more than the no itself. Own your slice of the mess first. This idea comes from principles in conflict resolution and behavioral psychology. In any disagreement, responsibility is almost never one-sided. But conversations go nowhere when both people focus only on defending themselves. When you start by acknowledging your own part, however small, it lowers defensiveness and opens the door to progress. Psychologically, this works because it activates something called reciprocity. When one person shows vulnerability or takes responsibility, the other person is more likely to do the same. It shifts the dynamic from opposition to collaboration. Here's what it looks like in real life. Say you and a coworker had a tense exchange. Instead of opening with, "You misunderstood me," you might say, "I realize I interrupted you, and that probably didn't help." That simple act of ownership changes the tone. It shows emotional maturity, and it earns trust. This applies to personal relationships too. Telling a partner, "I got defensive, and I shouldn't have," often softens the ground for a more honest conversation. Even if you think the other person's role was bigger, naming your part first makes it more likely they'll reflect on theirs. Owning your slice doesn't mean taking the blame for everything. It just means going first and focusing on what you control. It signals that you're here to understand, not just to be right. And in many cases, that one small admission is what turns a standstill into a breakthrough. Progress beats perfection every single time. You start a new habit, working out, writing, eating healthier, and after one off day, you feel like you've blown it. So you pause, or quit, or wait for the right time to start again. That's the trap of perfection. And psychology shows there's a much better path. Progress beats perfection every single time. This idea is grounded in behavioral momentum, the principle that small, consistent actions build lasting habits more effectively than occasional, flawless ones. When people aim for perfection, they tend to delay starting, avoid risk, and get discouraged by normal setbacks. But progress is different. It allows space for imperfection while still moving forward. In psychology, this ties to self-efficacy, your belief in your ability to handle challenges and make changes. Every time you take a step, even a small one, you reinforce the idea that you're capable. That builds motivation over time. Perfection, on the other hand, often creates rigid expectations that collapse under the first sign of failure. Take a simple example, someone who wants to read more. A perfection mindset says, I need to finish a book every week. Miss that target once, and it feels like failure. A progress mindset says, reading 10 minutes today is better than none. That habit sticks because it's flexible, and that flexibility builds real change. This applies to learning, health, relationships, and even creativity. Growth isn't about flawless execution. It's about showing up again, even when it's messy. Psychologically, celebrating progress helps reduce anxiety, boost confidence, and increase resilience. It turns goals into systems, not tests. And over time, the people who succeed most aren't the ones who did it perfectly. They're the ones who kept showing up, one imperfect step at a time. Real-life cheat codes. Have you ever noticed when people feel in sync, not studied, they open up? This is what the mirror technique taps into. It starts small, a shared pace, similar posture, picking up on the rhythm of how they speak. When someone leans in, you follow just slightly. When they pause, you don't rush in. You let that silence breathe. When you reply, you reflect their own words back. It's not about imitation, it's about resonance. And in that moment, the conversation stops feeling like a negotiation and starts feeling like a connection. Picture a hallway conversation. A team member is clearly holding back. Instead of interrogating, you simply match their calm tone, mirror their stance, and give them room. They say more. You stay with them. And slowly, what was guarded becomes open. Mirroring works because it bypasses resistance. It signals, I'm not here to fix you or judge you. I'm just here with you. You'll see it in counseling sessions, in high-stakes sales calls, in tough parenting moments where logic fails but empathy gets through. People soften when they feel like you're on the same wavelength, even if the topic is hard. When you match someone's emotional tempo, they don't feel cornered. They feel safe. And safety leads to honesty. The mirror technique doesn't demand cleverness, just attention. It's one of the quietest ways to build trust, and one of the fastest. The yes ladder. Agreement doesn't always begin with the big question. It often starts smaller. One quiet yes at a time. In a shared office kitchen, a team lead approaches a new hire. It's their first week, and they've been quiet during meetings. Instead of diving into feedback, the lead starts simple. Hey, did you find the printer okay yesterday? They nod. Yeah. A smile. And the onboarding videos, those didn't freeze up on you? Another nod. Nope, all smooth. One more. Mind if we catch up for 5 minutes later this afternoon? Another soft yes. Easier this time. And when they sit down later to talk about workflow and expectations, there's no defensiveness, just a shared rhythm. The yes ladder works by building momentum through agreement. Small, non-threatening questions first. Things the other person can say yes to without effort or hesitation. Each yes relaxes the body a little more. It sets a pattern. By the time you ask for something bigger, it doesn't feel like a request. It feels like the next step in the same direction. It's something you'll see in old friendships when reconnecting after time apart, or in community organizing where you build trust not with speeches, but with simple, mutual understanding, even in casual relationships, where agreement builds comfort before it builds influence. You're not pushing, you're aligning. You're easing the other person into the experience with their own momentum. Because the hardest part of saying yes isn't the word, it's the fear of being pulled too fast. But when you're already halfway up the ladder, taking one more step feels natural. Not because someone talked you into it, but because you walked there, one yes at a time. Fake a deadline to get faster results. You're sitting at your desk, your coworker across from you, scrolling through emails. You've been working on the same project for a while, but progress has stalled. There's no immediate pressure, but the task feels endless. You casually say, "Hey, I need to wrap this up by 3 p.m. Can you get that data together by then?" Your coworker nods, suddenly picking up the pace. They dig into their files, pulling things together with a sense of purpose. Before you know it, the task is done, and you realize the deadline you gave them wasn't real. It was just a prompt to make it happen faster. When we feel the weight of a deadline, real or not, the brain shifts into a higher gear. The feeling of urgency narrows focus, cutting out distractions. That rush of energy doesn't always come without a deadline, but when we think we have one, we're more likely to act decisively. This works in sales, when a salesperson creates the illusion of scarcity, and it works in your everyday work life. Even in relationships, creating a sense of time pressure can help move decisions forward. The trick isn't about deceiving people. It's about creating the mental environment that makes them act more decisively. You don't need to pressure someone. Sometimes all it takes is creating a sense of time to encourage action. Say because for instant obedience, not because the explanation is always good, but because there is one. We're wired to connect requests with reasons. Without a because, a question feels like a demand. Add it, and it becomes a conversation, even if the reason is barely more than air. You'll see it in everyday moments. Could I take this seat because my foot's cramping? Mind if I go ahead because my coffee's already paid for? Even, can I borrow your charger because mine's in the other room? The actual logic doesn't have to be airtight. The word alone acts like a key. It signals structure, intention, a path. And people follow paths more easily than gaps. This also shows up in smaller social dynamics. Not manipulation, just friction reduction. Because gives the other person a reason to say yes without overthinking it. So next time you're asking something, even something small, don't just ask. Anchor it. Because once you give the mind a reason, it stops holding the brakes. Use we instead of you. You forgot to lock the door. Versus, looks like we forgot to lock the door. Same facts, different feeling, one point. The other joins. When you say we instead of you, you're not changing what happened. You're changing how it lands. The shift is subtle, but the emotional impact is immediate. Suddenly, you're not blaming. You're partnering. This isn't about avoiding responsibility. It's about preserving connection. Because even small phrases can make someone feel either isolated or included. And we is one of the quickest ways to move toward inclusion. You'll hear it between friends trying to sort out a miscommunication. We must have crossed wires feels lighter than you didn't say that. Or when making group decisions, should we head out? Carries more warmth than are you ready to go? It also shows up in apologies. We didn't handle that right. Softens the ground. Even if one person played a bigger role, the shared framing builds trust. We language signals unity, especially in moments that could become tense. And when people feel like you're on their side, they stop defending and start listening. So the next time something small goes sideways, don't assign the spotlight. Share it. Use we not to blur the truth, but to hold it gently. Because the goal isn't to be right, it's to stay close. Ask for opinions, not answers. Advice can feel heavy, but asking for someone's opinion? That opens a different kind of door. Late morning in a shared office kitchen, two co-workers stand by the sink, waiting for the coffee to finish brewing. One of them turns, holding a printed draft of a proposal. I'm not sure what to do with the structure here, she says, flipping to the second page. What's your opinion on this layout? The other looks it over, relaxes a bit, and starts talking. Not cautiously, not like he's solving a puzzle, but conversationally. They bounce ideas back and forth for a few minutes. No pressure, no performance, just a quiet flow that somehow sharpens the idea without either of them forcing it. Asking for an opinion, rather than a direct answer, gives someone room to think without feeling cornered. It shows that you value their perspective, not just their correctness. That shift in tone makes it easier for people to open up, to share without filtering. Therapists often invite opinions to help clients reflect safely. In parenting, asking kids what they think makes them feel heard, not tested. In negotiation, it turns tension into dialogue. In sales, it keeps conversations human instead of transactional. When you ask for an answer, someone has to be right. When you ask for an opinion, they just have to be honest. The best conversations often begin where certainty steps aside. Invite perspective, not just solutions, and you'll find people are more willing to meet you where you are. And from there, better thinking happens on both sides. Use humor first, logic later. Tension doesn't always need to be solved. It often just needs to be softened. A man and his teenage daughter sit in the car outside the grocery store. The engine is off. The bags are packed, but neither of them is moving. The mood is heavy. They've been arguing all day. Grades, curfews, tone of voice. It's quiet now, but not peaceful. The father looks ahead, then says, "You know, when I was your age, I was grounded so often, my parents gave me my own punishment calendar. Color-coded." She cracks a smile, tries to hide it. He leans in. "Seriously, I had weekends booked for bad attitude through mid-April." She laughs, just a little. "That's enough." He waits, then adds calmly, "I get that it feels like I'm always on your case, but I need you to hear me when I say I care too much to stay quiet." Humor lowers defenses. It breaks through walls faster than facts ever will. When someone's upset, stressed, guarded, logic can feel like pressure. But a well-placed joke, a little self-deprecation, a surprising line, it creates space. Space for the real conversation to land. In therapy, humor disarms shame. In sales, it turns tension into trust. In parenting, it pulls kids out of their shell. In conflict, it resets the rhythm before a real point is made. You're not using humor to avoid the serious part. You're using it to earn the right to speak it. Sometimes, the best way to be heard isn't to push harder. It's to make someone laugh just enough that they stop bracing. And then, when they're ready, you lead them to the heart of what matters, gently and fully awake. Speak to pain, not logic. You're sitting across from a colleague in a meeting room. The presentation is about to start, but you sense there's resistance in the air. They've got their arms crossed, a slight frown, and they're checking their phone every few minutes. You launch into the benefits of the new project, detailing timelines, efficiency gains, and cost savings. But as you speak, you see their attention wandering, their body language closed off. Then, without missing a beat, you shift. "I know we're all overwhelmed with deadlines right now, and adding another project might feel like too much. But imagine trying to meet your targets without this tool. It's only going to make things harder. The frustration of not having it will pile up, and we'll all be scrambling at the last minute." Suddenly their posture softens. They stop scrolling. They look at you. You've spoken to the pain, not the logic. People make decisions based on emotions, not logic. The brain responds faster to feelings of discomfort, fear, or frustration than it does to rational arguments. When you speak to the pain, the immediate concerns and frustrations, it shifts the mindset. They stop thinking about numbers and start thinking about how the situation will affect them. This technique works in sales when you focus on what's at stake for the customer, in negotiations when you highlight what could be lost, and even in relationships when you acknowledge a person's struggles rather than just presenting facts. Next time you need someone's attention or action, speak to what they feel, not just what they think. The emotional response is what drives change. Be interested, not interesting. Sometimes the most magnetic person in the room is the one who isn't trying to be. A man and a woman sit at opposite ends of a shared bench outside a small bookstore. It's one of those quiet afternoons where no one's in a rush. The man strikes up a conversation. Nothing flashy, just a comment about the book she's holding. She smiles, says she's rereading it for the third time. Instead of offering his own opinion, he asks what keeps her coming back to it. Her answer leads to something more: family, memory, old routines. She keeps talking and he keeps listening, not with polite nods, but with real attention. 10 minutes pass before she finally says, "I don't usually talk like this to strangers," but she's not apologizing. She's surprised, grateful even. Being interested in someone rather than trying to be interesting yourself shifts the energy. It removes the need to impress. And in that space, people relax. They become more open, more engaged. In sales, this builds trust faster than any clever pitch. In therapy, it draws out depth. In parenting, it tells a child their thoughts matter. In dating, it makes space for something honest. And in everyday life, on benches, in waiting rooms, over shared meals, it's how meaningful connection quietly begins. You don't have to be memorable to make an impact. You just have to make someone feel like they are. In the end, people rarely remember your stories as much as how you made them feel while they told theirs. And the one who asks with curiosity, not ego, often leaves the strongest impression of all. End with a compliment, always. Final moments often carry more weight than we think. What we say last is what tends to linger. In a small office break room, a short conversation between co-workers winds down. One of them had been venting. A project fell apart, a client didn't respond, and nothing felt like it was landing. The other offered a few suggestions, asked some thoughtful questions, and mostly just listened. As the first one gets up to leave, they pause in the doorway. The listener adds gently, "By the way, I meant to say, your last presentation, it's still being talked about. You really set the tone for the quarter." The room softens. The air clears just a little. The rest of the day goes better, even if nothing else changes. Ending with a compliment doesn't mean ignoring problems. It means choosing what gets remembered. In any interaction, especially ones that are hard, awkward, or emotionally loaded, the final note sticks. A single positive remark can act as a buffer. It helps someone leave the moment feeling seen, not just managed. Therapists often close sessions this way, reinforcing something the person did well. In parenting, it encourages resilience after correction. In sales, it closes a pitch with sincerity. In leadership, it leaves the door open for future trust, even after disagreement. You don't have to flatter. You don't have to sugarcoat. Just find one thing real and say it. The last thing you offer someone, even in passing, often becomes the first thing they carry into whatever comes next. And when that thing is something kind and true, it stays longer than you think. Biggest philosophy ideas. Have you ever wondered why reality is exactly the way it is? Why do things exist at all rather than nothing? These might sound like simple questions, but they're actually part of one of the oldest and deepest branches of philosophy, metaphysics. Metaphysics isn't as complicated as it sounds. At its core, it's simply the study of reality itself. It goes beyond physics or science, asking fundamental questions about existence. Where science explains how things happen, metaphysics asks what existence itself really is. This type of thinking started with the ancient Greek philosopher Aristotle. Interestingly, the word metaphysics originally just meant after physics, because Aristotle wrote about these ideas right after he wrote about physical things like motion and matter. But over time, the term took on a deeper meaning, becoming philosophy's attempt to understand the ultimate nature of reality. Metaphysics covers two main areas. The first is called ontology, which tries to classify everything that exists. Ontologists explore whether abstract ideas, like beauty, goodness, or numbers, are real things or just concepts we create in our minds. For example, does the idea of redness exist by itself, or is it only real because we see red objects? The second area deals with more personal, relatable questions about existence, things like the nature of our minds and consciousness, free will, or even whether anything exists beyond the physical world. These questions aren't easy, but they shape how we understand ourselves and our place in the universe. Even though metaphysics doesn't always offer concrete answers like science, it pushes our understanding deeper. It reminds us that behind everyday life is an incredible mystery, existence itself. And that's what makes metaphysics fascinating. It doesn't require you to be a philosopher. It simply invites you to look a little closer at the reality around you. Epistemology. Most of what you believe, you didn't discover for yourself. You heard it, read it, or were told, and decided it was probably true. But how do you know it's true? That's where epistemology comes in. It's the branch of philosophy that studies knowledge, what it is, how we get it, and how we can be sure we actually have it. Start with the basics. To say you know something, three things usually need to be true. First, the belief has to be correct. Second, you have to believe it. And third, you need a good reason for believing it. That last part, justification, is what separates knowledge from a lucky guess. Imagine someone randomly picks a lottery number and wins. They guessed right, but they didn't really know. In contrast, if a meteorologist uses weather data to predict rain tomorrow, and it does rain, that's closer to knowledge. It's not just a guess, it's a belief backed by evidence. Epistemology also explores where knowledge comes from. Some philosophers argue that we're born with certain truths already built in. Others say all knowledge comes from experience. Then there are questions about memory, perception, and even language, since most of what we know is passed down from others. The field also tackles skepticism. How can we trust what our senses tell us when illusions and false memories exist? And how do we know that the world outside our mind actually matches how we experience it? Epistemology doesn't always offer easy answers, but it lays the groundwork for understanding what counts as a reliable belief. In a world full of information, misinformation, and uncertainty, that kind of clarity is more important than ever. Rationalism. You don't need to see a triangle to know it has three sides. Some things we just seem to know by thinking. That's the starting point of rationalism. Rationalism is the philosophical view that reason is the primary source of knowledge. It claims that certain truths can be known independently of experience, just by using logic, thought, and deduction. In other words, not everything we know comes from the senses. This idea stands in contrast to empiricism, which says that knowledge comes mainly from observation and experience. Rationalists argue that while experience is useful, it isn't the foundation of all knowledge. That's a truth you can grasp through reasoning alone. Rationalist thinkers believe that the mind contains certain basic ideas or structures from birth. These are often called innate ideas. Examples include concepts like quantity, identity, or even cause and effect. You don't learn them from the outside world. They're already built into how you think. One of the most famous rationalists, René Descartes, used pure reasoning to try to establish certainty. He started by doubting everything, including his senses, and worked his way up using logical steps. The idea was that reason could build a solid foundation for knowledge, even when experience might be misleading. Rationalism has had a huge influence on science, mathematics, and philosophy. It supports the idea that the mind is not just a passive receiver of information, but an active tool for discovering truth. By relying on reason, rationalism helps explain how we understand things that go beyond immediate experience, things that are abstract, universal, and often essential to how we make sense of the world. Empiricism. You know fire is hot because you felt it. You know sugar is sweet because you've tasted it. These aren't ideas you were born with. They came from experience. That's the core idea behind empiricism. Empiricism is the philosophical view that all knowledge comes from sensory experience. It says we're not born knowing things. We start with a blank slate, and everything we learn comes from what we see, hear, touch, taste, and smell. This idea directly challenges rationalism, which claims that some knowledge is built into the mind. Empiricists push back, arguing that without experience, even the most basic concepts wouldn't exist. You don't know what cold is until you've felt it. You don't understand blue unless you've seen it. The roots of empiricism go back to thinkers like John Locke, who described the mind at birth as a blank sheet of paper. For Locke, experience writes on that paper over time, through direct observation and reflection. Later philosophers like George Berkeley and David Hume developed the idea further, showing how everything from complex ideas to moral beliefs could be traced back to experience. Empiricism also laid the foundation for the modern scientific method. Instead of relying on pure logic or intuition, scientists observe, measure, and test. They build knowledge by gathering data and repeating experiments. That method reflects the core belief of empiricism, that truth starts with what we can observe. Of course, empiricism isn't just about science. It shapes how we think about learning, memory, perception, and even how we trust information. By grounding knowledge in experience, empiricism builds a framework for understanding the world through the evidence it gives us, one sense at a time. Absurdism. You wake up, go to work, pay bills, make plans, doing your best to live a meaningful life, but the world doesn't give you any clear reason why. That disconnect is what absurdism is all about. Absurdism is a philosophical idea that centers on the clash between our search for meaning and the lack of any guaranteed meaning in the universe. It doesn't say life is meaningless. It says we want meaning, and the universe doesn't offer it in any obvious way. That gap between what we expect and what we get is called the absurd. The idea became well known through the work of Albert Camus. He wasn't saying life is hopeless. In fact, his whole point was that the absurd is a condition we all face, and the way we respond to it matters. The absurd isn't something to solve or escape. It's something to recognize and live with. A good example is the story of Sisyphus, a figure from Greek mythology. He's punished by the gods, forced to roll a giant boulder up a hill forever, only for it to roll back down each time. To many, that sounds like a nightmare. but Camus used it to explain how humans deal with absurdity. The task may never end, but we still keep pushing. Absurdism isn't about giving up. It's about rejecting false answers, those neat explanations that claim to give life meaning when they don't really hold up. Instead, it encourages people to face reality head-on, even when it's messy or unclear. At its core, absurdism is about honesty. It doesn't offer comfort or certainty, but it does give a framework for how to live in a world that doesn't explain itself, and how to keep going anyway. Existentialism. Existentialism is a philosophical movement that focuses on human freedom, individuality, and the challenge of creating meaning in a world that doesn't provide it for you. It became especially influential in the 20th century, shaped by thinkers like Jean-Paul Sartre, Simone de Beauvoir, and Albert Camus. At its core, existentialism starts with the idea that existence comes before essence. In simpler terms, people exist first, and only later define who they are through choices and actions. Unlike a knife, which is made with a specific purpose, humans aren't born with a built-in function. Instead, they have to figure it out as they go. This freedom sounds empowering, but it also comes with pressure. If no one else can decide your purpose for you, then you're fully responsible for shaping your life. That responsibility can lead to anxiety, doubt, or what existentialists call angst. But it also means that meaning isn't something to be discovered, it's something to be made. Existentialism also wrestles with the idea of absurdity, the conflict between our desire for meaning and a universe that doesn't guarantee any. Camus famously used the image of Sisyphus, a man doomed to push a boulder uphill forever, to show what it means to keep going even when life feels pointless. This philosophy isn't about despair, it's about realism. Existentialism doesn't offer comforting answers, but it does offer clarity. You're not stuck in a system you didn't choose. You have the power to define your own values and live by them, even in the face of uncertainty. That, according to existentialism, is what makes life truly yours. Nihilism. If nothing matters, does anything mean anything at all? That's the unsettling starting point of nihilism. Nihilism is the philosophical belief that life lacks inherent meaning, value, or purpose. It suggests that moral systems, social structures, and even truth itself are not fixed or objective. They're human inventions. At its core, nihilism challenges the idea that the world has built-in significance waiting to be discovered. This idea isn't just a mood or a reaction to disappointment, it's a serious philosophical position that's been explored by thinkers like Friedrich Nietzsche, though often misunderstood. Nihilism doesn't automatically mean despair. It's more about confronting the possibility that the beliefs we've built our lives around might not be grounded in anything solid. There are different types of nihilism. Existential nihilism questions whether human life has any true meaning. Moral nihilism doubts that there are any universal moral truths. Epistemological nihilism goes even further, suggesting that knowledge itself might not be possible. In practice, nihilism can feel like hitting a wall. If traditional values and beliefs don't hold up to scrutiny, what's left? For some, that question leads to apathy or cynicism. But others use it as a turning point. If nothing is inherently meaningful, then maybe meaning is something we're free to create ourselves. Nihilism became especially prominent in the modern era, as religious certainty declined and science replaced old world views. But rather than just erase old answers, nihilism opens up a new kind of challenge. How to live in a world without guarantees, where certainty is out of reach. As a philosophy, Nihilism doesn't offer comfort or reassurance, but it does offer honesty. It strips things down to their core and asks us to consider what remains when all the usual assumptions fall away. Ethics. Ethics is the branch of philosophy that studies what's right and wrong and why certain actions are considered good or bad. It's not just about following rules. It's about understanding what kind of life we should live, how we should treat others, and what principles should guide our decisions. At the foundation of ethics are three major approaches. The first is consequentialism, which says the right action is the one that leads to the best outcome. The most well-known version is utilitarianism, which focuses on maximizing happiness and minimizing suffering. For example, if telling a lie would save someone's life, a consequentialist might say it's the right thing to do. The second is deontology, which focuses on rules and duties rather than results. According to this view, some actions are simply right or wrong, no matter the consequences. Telling the truth, for instance, is a duty, even if it leads to a difficult outcome. The third is virtue ethics, which centers on the kind of person you are, rather than any one action. It's about developing good character traits, like honesty, courage, and compassion, so that doing the right thing becomes second nature. Ethics doesn't just apply to personal choices. It plays a key role in law, medicine, business, technology, and public policy. It asks how we should live together in a society, how we resolve conflicts, and how we balance individual freedom with responsibility to others. Philosophers explore ethics to better understand what fairness, justice, and integrity really mean, and how we can apply those ideas in the real world. Logic. If you say all cats are mammals and your pet is a cat, then it has to be a mammal. That's logic. Clean, simple, and hard to argue with. Logic is the branch of philosophy that studies the rules of correct reasoning. It helps us figure out which arguments make sense and which ones fall apart. Instead of focusing on what we believe, logic looks at how we think and whether our conclusions follow from our starting points. At its most basic level, logic deals with statements and their relationships. If one thing is true, what else must be true because of it? This structure is what makes logical thinking so powerful. It creates chains of reasoning that are clear, predictable, and testable. There are different types of logic, but the two most common are deductive and inductive. Deductive logic starts with general principles and applies them to specific cases. For example, all humans are mortal. Socrates is a human, therefore Socrates is mortal. If the starting points are true, the conclusion has to be true. Inductive logic works the other way. It looks at patterns in specific examples to form general conclusions, like noticing that the sun rises every morning and concluding that it probably will tomorrow too. Inductive reasoning isn't as certain as deduction, but it's useful for everyday decision-making and science. Modern logic also includes symbolic systems, ways to represent arguments using symbols and formulas, much like math. These tools help break down complex reasoning into simpler parts, especially when evaluating abstract ideas. Logic doesn't tell us what's true, but it tells us what follows from what. It's the backbone of rational thought, and one of philosophy's most precise tools for separating good thinking from bad. Free will. You decide what to wear, what to eat, and when to speak. It feels like those decisions come from you, and only you. That feeling is at the heart of one of philosophy's biggest ideas, free will. Free will is the belief that people have the ability to make choices that are not completely determined by outside forces. It means your actions aren't just the result of instincts, genetics, or environmental conditions. They're something you actively choose. In short, you could have done otherwise. The concept sounds simple, but it quickly gets complicated. If your thoughts and decisions are shaped by your brain, and your brain follows the laws of physics, then aren't your choices just part of a larger chain of cause and effect? That's the challenge raised by determinism, the idea that everything, including human behavior, has a cause. Philosophers have responded to this in different ways. Libertarians, in the philosophical sense, believe true free will exists, and that we can sometimes step outside the chain of cause and effect to choose freely. Determinists, on the other hand, argue that our choices are fully determined, even if we feel like we're free. Then there's compatibilism, a middle ground view. Compatibilists say free will doesn't require complete freedom from causation. As long as you're acting according to your own motivations, not being forced, you can still be considered free, even if those motivations have causes. This debate has major implications. If people don't have free will, it challenges how we think about responsibility, praise, and blame. It even impacts legal systems, ethics, and personal identity. Free will sits at the center of how we understand human agency. Whether we fully control our choices or just believe we do, the concept plays a major role in how we live, act, and relate to others. Biggest psychology ideas. The unconscious rules reality. You make a decision in a split second. It feels automatic. But what if that choice wasn't really made in the moment, but days, months, or even years earlier, without your awareness? This is the heart of Sigmund Freud's famous idea. The unconscious is the true psychical reality. In simple terms, Freud believed that much of what drives our thoughts, feelings, and behaviors happens outside of conscious awareness. While we like to think we're in full control, he argued that the real engine of the mind runs in the background. Freud divided the mind into 3 layers. The conscious is everything you're currently aware of, your thoughts right now. The preconscious holds things you can access if you try, like a memory or fact. But the unconscious is different. It's a deep reservoir of hidden memories, instincts, desires, and fears that shape how you see the world, even if you never realize it. For example, a person might avoid commitment in relationships without knowing why. Freud would suggest that an unconscious fear, maybe rooted in a childhood experience, is silently guiding that behavior. The person isn't lying or in denial. They genuinely don't know the reason themselves. Freud saw evidence of the unconscious everywhere, in dreams, slips of the tongue, sudden emotional reactions, and even in humor. His method of psychoanalysis was designed to bring some of those hidden conflicts to light by encouraging free association, interpreting dreams, and analyzing patterns in speech and behavior. Though Freud's theories are debated today, his core insight still resonates. We're not just shaped by what we know, but by what we don't. The unconscious isn't just a shadow. It's a powerful force that influences how we think, what we fear, and how we live. And understanding it became one of psychology's boldest ambitions. The self is story. We often think of ourselves as having a core identity, something fixed and unchanging. But psychological research suggests something different. The self is a narrative we edit as we live. In other words, we're not just living our lives, we're also constantly shaping the story we tell about who we are. Psychologist Dan McAdams helped develop this idea through his work on narrative identity. He argued that people build a sense of self by constructing a personal story, one that connects the past, present, and imagined future. This story gives life coherence and meaning, but it's not carved in stone. It's edited, reframed, and updated as new experiences unfold. We don't remember every moment. We highlight certain events, leave others out, and reinterpret past experiences in light of where we are now. A failure from years ago might once have felt like the end of a path. Later, it becomes a turning point in a story about resilience. A quiet childhood might be remembered as lonely or peaceful, depending on the mood or message we're constructing. This narrative isn't fiction. It's grounded in real events. But it's selective, shaped by emotion, context, and memory. And because stories are social, we often adapt them to fit what others expect to hear, or what we want to believe about ourselves. Understanding the self as a narrative helps explain how people change. When someone undergoes therapy, recovers from trauma, or simply matures over time, what shifts isn't just behavior, it's how they frame their story. They might go from victim to survivor, from outsider to leader. By studying narrative identity, psychologists have found that people with coherent, hopeful life stories tend to have greater well-being. The stories we tell aren't just reflections of who we are, they're tools we use to become who we want to be. Perception is guided hallucination. You walk into a dimly lit room and think you see someone standing in the corner. Your heart jumps until you realize it's just a coat on a chair. That moment of confusion reveals something surprising about how perception works. It's not just about what your eyes take in, it's about what your brain expects to see. Psychologist and cognitive scientist Anil Seth describes perception as externally guided hallucination. The idea is simple but powerful. Your brain is constantly generating predictions about the world, and your senses help correct or confirm those guesses. At any given moment, your brain is using past experience, context, and expectation to build a model of what's around you. Vision, for instance, isn't just a camera feed, it's a reconstruction. You don't see raw data, you see what your brain believes is most likely based on what it knows. This is why optical illusions work. Your brain fills in gaps, makes assumptions, and sometimes gets it wrong. But most of the time, it gets it right, because the external world helps guide the process. Light, sound, texture, and motion shape those predictions into a perception that feels solid and reliable. In that sense, perception is like a controlled hallucination, one that stays in sync with reality as long as the sensory data lines up. When those signals break down, as in certain mental illnesses or neurological conditions, the hallucination can become untethered from reality. This view changes how we think about everyday experience. It shows that perception is active, not passive. It's not just about sensing, it's about interpreting. And even when the world feels crystal clear, what you see is still a best guess, refined moment by what your brain expects and what the world provides. Emotions come before awareness. You tense up before you realize you're nervous. Your heart pounds, your palms sweat, and only after a moment do you say, "I'm anxious." This isn't just a quirk of human experience. It's how emotions work. Emotions arise before we know we're feeling them. This idea comes from research in affective neuroscience, particularly the work of Joseph Ledoux, who studied how the brain processes fear. He found that emotional responses, especially to threats, begin before the conscious mind has a chance to catch up. The brain reacts first, then informs you afterward. The process starts deep in the brain, in structures like the amygdala, which are responsible for detecting danger and triggering a rapid response. If you hear a sudden loud noise, your body flinches and your heart rate jumps instantly. Only afterward do you consciously label the feeling as fear or surprise. This rapid response system evolved to help us survive, to act before we think. Even emotions like joy, disgust, or anger follow a similar pattern. They begin as unconscious physiological shifts, changes in heart rate, posture, muscle tension, or facial expression. Our brains use these cues, along with the situation around us, to decide what we're feeling. This understanding reshapes how we think about emotion regulation. Since emotions begin below awareness, we often don't choose them. We manage them after they've started. Recognizing this helps explain why people sometimes act emotionally before they realize what triggered them. It also highlights the importance of emotional awareness. People who are better at recognizing early bodily cues, what psychologists call interoception, are often better at navigating their feelings. They notice the emotion early, which gives them more control over how they respond. In the end, emotions aren't just thoughts we reflect on. They're automatic, physical processes that shape how we experience the world, often before we have the words to describe them. Memory rewrites experience. You might think your memory works like a video camera, recording life as it happens, ready to play back exactly what occurred. But psychologists have discovered something very different. Memory is not a recording device. It's a storyteller. This idea comes from decades of research showing that memories are not perfect snapshots. Instead, they are reconstructions, mental stories that we piece together each time we try to remember. Psychologist Elizabeth Loftus famously demonstrated how easily memories can be shaped, even altered, by suggestion, emotion, or time. When we recall something, our brains don't pull up a file. We recreate the event using fragments of sensory input, emotion, knowledge, and context. And like any storyteller, the brain fills in gaps. That might mean exaggerating details, smoothing over inconsistencies, or even adding entirely false elements if they help the story make more sense. For example, someone recalling a childhood birthday might vividly remember a cake that wasn't there, or believe their friends sang a particular song that actually came from a different party. These errors aren't signs of dishonesty. They're signs of how memory works. It prioritizes meaning and coherence over accuracy. This helps explain why two people can experience the same event but recall it differently. Each person's memory is shaped not just by what happened, but by how they felt, what they focused on, and what they've come to believe since. Understanding memory as a storytelling process has serious implications for eyewitness testimony, for therapy, and for how we interpret our own pasts. It shows that our memories are not simple records, but living narratives that evolve over time. They're influenced by who we are now, what we need to believe, and the stories we tell, not just about the world, but about ourselves. Breakdown can be breakthrough. When someone has a mental health crisis, the instinct is to see it as a failure, a breakdown of stability, reason, or control. But psychologist R.D. Laing offered a different perspective. He believed that what looks like madness might sometimes be the beginning of something transformative. His idea, madness need not be all breakdown, it may also be breakthrough. Laing worked with patients experiencing schizophrenia and other severe mental health conditions. What struck him wasn't just their symptoms, it was the meaning behind them. He suggested that for some people, a psychological crisis isn't just random dysfunction. It can be a kind of emotional overload, a response to trauma, isolation, or inner conflict that the mind can no longer manage through ordinary means. In Laing's view, episodes of psychosis, while distressing and disorienting, can also be part of a deeper search for meaning, identity, or healing. He argued that the mind might go through chaos not just to collapse, but to rebuild. The person isn't losing touch with reality as much as stepping away from a reality that may have already stopped making sense. For example, someone growing up in an emotionally rigid or abusive environment might eventually reject the logic of that world. The rejection might look like breakdown, withdrawal, delusions, or erratic behavior. But Lang saw in that a possible attempt to escape false roles and move toward a more authentic self. He didn't romanticize mental illness or deny its risks, but he believed that how society responds to psychological distress, through judgment, over-medication, or forced control, can sometimes worsen the crisis. Instead, Lang called for compassion, understanding, and space for people to work through their inner experiences. His work redefined the way many therapists think about mental illness, not just as something to stop, but sometimes as something to listen to. Life is performance. You walk into a meeting, straighten your posture, and put on a confident tone, even if you don't feel it. Later, with close friends, your voice softens and your guard drops. These shifts happen naturally, almost like switching roles in a play. Sociologist Irving Goffman noticed this pattern and described it with a powerful phrase: life is a dramatically enacted thing. Goffman's work in the mid-20th century introduced a new way of thinking about everyday behavior. He suggested that people don't just behave, they perform. In every social situation, individuals play roles based on the setting, the audience, and the expectations involved. This isn't faking, it's adapting. He called this the dramaturgical model of social interaction. Just like actors on stage, people manage impressions, follow scripts, and use props, like clothing, body language, or tone of voice, to shape how they're perceived. In formal settings, people present their front stage selves, polished, polite, and prepared. In private, they shift to the backstage, where they're more relaxed and authentic. For example, a teacher leads a class with authority, projecting expertise and calm. But in the staff room, the same person may vent frustrations or seek support, switching roles based on context. Goffman's insight wasn't cynical. He didn't suggest people are fake. Instead, he showed how identity is fluid and responsive. Social life requires coordination, and much of that comes through subtle performance. We all tailor our behavior, not out of dishonesty, but to meet the needs of different situations. This view helps psychologists and sociologists understand that identity isn't static, it's negotiated in real time. By seeing life as something enacted, Goffman revealed how social behavior is both structured and flexible, shaped moment by the roles we play and the stories we tell. Meaning ends suffering. Pain is hard to avoid. It shows up in illness, loss, failure, or just the slow weight of disappointment. But psychologist Viktor Frankl believed there was something even more important than avoiding suffering, finding a reason to endure it. Frankl, a psychiatrist and Holocaust survivor, developed a form of therapy called logotherapy, centered on the idea that humans are driven by the need to find meaning. He observed that in extreme conditions, even in concentration camps, those who could connect their suffering to a sense of purpose had a better chance of survival and psychological resilience. His famous insight was this: suffering ceases to be suffering at the moment it finds a meaning. That doesn't mean pain disappears. It means the emotional impact of suffering changes when it's tied to something larger, something understandable or purposeful. For example, a parent staying up night after night with a sick child may feel physically and emotionally drained, but that sacrifice feels different than random discomfort because it's anchored in love and responsibility. The suffering is still real, but it makes sense. Frankl believed that people don't need happiness as much as they need meaning. When life feels senseless, even small frustrations can become overwhelming. But when people believe their pain contributes to something they value, whether that's raising a family, building something lasting, or helping others, they can often endure far more than they expected. Logotherapy encourages people to ask what their suffering is pointing to. What value, cause, or belief is worth the pain? Frankl didn't offer simple reassurance. He offered a challenge. That even in the worst moments, people can choose how to relate to their suffering, and in that choice, they can begin to reclaim a sense of purpose. Trauma lives in body. You can leave the place, end the relationship, or push through the pain, but somehow your body still reacts. A sudden noise, a smell, a crowded room. That's because the body keeps the score of every trauma, and it doesn't always wait for your permission to speak. Psychiatrist Bessel van der Kolk helped introduce this idea by showing that trauma isn't just psychological, it's physiological. After a traumatic experience, the brain doesn't simply file it away like a memory. Instead, it imprints it on the nervous system. Muscles stay tense. Breathing stays shallow. The body behaves as if the danger never fully ended. This is why survivors of trauma often experience physical symptoms, chronic pain, panic attacks, digestive issues, even when they're not consciously thinking about the past. These responses are automatic, rooted in survival mechanisms meant to keep us safe. But when those systems stay on high alert long after the threat is gone, they begin to interfere with everyday life. And this is where recovery gets misunderstood. You can't think your way out of a body that still feels unsafe. Traditional therapy helps, but for many, it's only part of the process. Regulating breath, grounding through movement, or slowly reintroducing safe touch. These are ways the body begins to unlearn its fear. The core idea flips the script on trauma. It's not just in your head, and healing isn't just about talking. It's about rebuilding a sense of internal safety, one physical signal at a time. For many people, the path forward starts not with memory, but with sensation, not with what they remember, but with what their body has never forgotten. Empathy, you've probably felt it before. Someone else is upset, and suddenly you feel a bit of that emotion too. That's empathy. It's the ability to understand and share what someone else is going through, even if you're not in their situation. Empathy isn't just being nice or polite. It's a built-in response that helps us connect with others. When you see a friend stressed before a big presentation and your stomach knots up a little, that's your brain simulating their experience. You're not just observing, you're internally mirroring their emotional state. This happens because of how our brains are wired. Certain cells called mirror neurons activate when we see someone experiencing something, especially emotions. These neurons allow us to mentally step into another person's shoes. It's not perfect, but it gives us a rough version of their feelings. Empathy comes in different forms. Cognitive empathy is when you understand what someone is feeling. Emotional empathy is when you actually feel some version of their emotion. Then there's compassionate empathy, when that feeling moves you to help. Everyday examples are everywhere. When you slow down to comfort someone who's had a bad day, or when you wince watching someone trip. Those small reactions are built on empathy. It helps people form friendships, support each other, and function in social groups. But empathy isn't automatic all the time. Stress, fatigue, or even unfamiliarity can reduce how empathetic we feel in a given moment. Still, it's a skill that can be strengthened with awareness and practice. Empathy isn't just an emotional response. It's a mental tool that helps us understand one another and build better social connections. Dumbest myth debunked. We use only 10% of our brain. This is one of the most well-known and completely wrong myths we hear in everyday life. The claim that we only use 10% of our brain has been around for over a century. It sounds just intuitive enough to earn a place in pop culture. But brain scans tell a very different story. When scientists use tools like fMRI to observe brain activity, they find that nearly every part of the brain is active at different times, depending on what you're doing. Simple actions like walking or listening to music engage multiple areas, and during complex tasks like solving a puzzle or recalling a memory, even more regions light up. There's no massive section of your brain sitting idle. The myth likely stuck because it's appealing. It makes us feel like we have untapped potential just waiting to be unlocked. But it's based on a misunderstanding. Some parts of the brain are more specialized, responsible for vision, movement, or language, and not all are firing at once. That doesn't mean they're unused. It just means they're used as needed. What's more, the brain is one of the most energy-hungry organs in the body. It uses around 20% of your energy, even though it weighs just 2% of your total body mass. Evolution doesn't keep around expensive, useless tissue. So no, you're not stuck with 10% power. You're already using far more than you think, just not all at once, and that's exactly how it's meant to work. Microwaves give you cancer. Some people worry that using a microwave could increase their risk of cancer. It's a common fear, usually based on the idea that microwave ovens use radiation, and radiation sounds dangerous. But not all radiation is the same. Microwaves work by using a type of non-ionizing radiation. That means it doesn't have enough energy to damage your DNA, which is the main way cancer starts. Instead, microwave radiation causes water molecules in food to vibrate, generating heat and warming the food from the inside out. It doesn't make the food radioactive, and it doesn't change the structure of the ingredients in a harmful way. The confusion often comes from mixing up different kinds of radiation. Ionizing radiation, like X-rays or ultraviolet light, can damage cells and DNA. But the kind used in microwave ovens is much weaker and not in the same category. It's closer to the radio waves that power your phone or Wi-Fi than anything harmful. Microwaves are also designed with safety in mind. The metal casing and mesh screen on the door prevent radiation from leaking out. As long as the microwave is working properly and the door seals correctly, there's no risk of exposure beyond the inside of the oven. Claims about microwaved food being less nutritious have also been studied. Cooking in a microwave may actually help preserve some nutrients better than boiling or frying, simply because it cooks food faster and uses less water. So while the word radiation can sound alarming, the kind used in microwaves isn't the dangerous type. It heats your food efficiently and safely, without increasing your cancer risk. The technology may feel a little mysterious, but it's well understood and widely tested. Humans evolved from monkeys. The phrase "humans evolved from monkeys" gets repeated a lot, but it's not quite accurate. It oversimplifies how evolution works and leads to some common misunderstandings about human origins. Humans didn't evolve from the monkeys we see today. Instead, humans and modern monkeys share a common ancestor, a species that lived millions of years ago and gave rise to multiple evolutionary branches. One of those branches eventually led to us. Another led to the monkeys and apes still living today. Think of it like a family tree. You and your cousins didn't come from each other. You both came from a shared grandparent. In the same way, humans and other primates are more like evolutionary cousins than one being descended directly from the other. The common ancestor we share with modern monkeys was likely a small, tree-dwelling primate that lived around 25 to 30 million years ago. Over time, different populations of its descendants adapted to different environments. Some became the various types of monkeys we know today, while others evolved into apes, and one specific branch of apes eventually evolved into early humans. Fossils and genetic evidence show that humans are most closely related to chimpanzees and bonobos, but even these are not our ancestors. We share about 98 to 99% of our DNA with them, but that similarity points to a shared past, not a direct line. Human evolution is marked by gradual changes, walking upright, developing larger brains, and using tools. These traits didn't suddenly appear. They developed over millions of years in response to shifting environments and survival needs. So while humans and monkeys are connected through evolution, we didn't come from monkeys, we came from the same ancient roots. Understanding that distinction helps make sense of how all life is interconnected without confusing the direction of evolution. You can sweat out toxins. It's a popular idea. Sit in a sauna, go for a long run, or do hot yoga, and you'll sweat out the toxins in your body. It sounds appealing, but that's not how the human body works. Sweat is your body's natural cooling system. When your internal temperature rises, your sweat glands release fluid, mostly water, with small amounts of salt, urea, and electrolytes. It helps regulate heat, not remove harmful substances. The idea that sweating can flush out toxins is a misunderstanding of what sweat is actually for. Toxins, like alcohol, drugs, or byproducts from food, are filtered by your liver and kidneys. These organs break down waste and send it out through urine or stool. That's their job. Sweat plays only a tiny, almost negligible role in removing waste. If your body relied on sweat to detox, you'd be in serious trouble. Some people feel better after sweating, especially during exercise. That's real, but it's more about the release of endorphins, improved circulation, and the psychological effects of physical effort, not the elimination of toxins through your skin. Medical studies have shown that even in extreme conditions, sweat contains only trace amounts of anything toxic. You'd have to sweat gallons to even approach what your kidneys clear in a single bathroom break. And for people with kidney or liver problems, sweating doesn't offer a backup plan. The body still relies on its internal filtration systems. That doesn't mean sweating is bad. It's a healthy part of how your body maintains balance. But it's not a detox method. If you're looking to support your body's natural detox process, drinking enough water, eating well, and getting regular sleep does far more than any amount of sweating ever will. Shaving makes hair grow back thicker. It's a common belief. If you shave your hair, it grows back thicker, darker, and faster. But that's not how hair works. The idea likely comes from what people notice right after shaving. When hair starts to grow back, it can feel rougher or look darker than before. But that's not because it changed. It's because of how the hair is cut. Shaving slices the hair straight across, leaving a blunt edge. That edge feels stubbly and coarse as it grows out. But the hair itself hasn't actually become thicker or denser. Hair grows from follicles under your skin, and shaving doesn't affect them. The thickness, color, and speed of your hair growth are determined by your genetics and hormones, not by your razor. Whether you're shaving your legs, face, or head, the razor is only trimming the visible part of the hair, not influencing what happens beneath the skin. The illusion of thickness also comes from the contrast between new stubble and the smoother skin around it. Freshly shaved hair hasn't yet been exposed to sunlight or natural wear, so it can appear darker too. But again, that's just appearance. It's not a real change in the hair's structure. Multiple studies have tested this idea over the years, and none have found that shaving changes hair's thickness, growth rate, or colour. If it did, we'd see people with visibly thicker eyebrows, arms, or other areas after regular shaving. And we don't. So while it might feel like your hair grows back thicker, it's just a trick of texture and timing. The razor's not changing your biology, it's just giving your hair a blunt edge. Eating before bed makes you fat. A lot of people believe that eating right before bed automatically leads to weight gain. It sounds logical. Eat, lie down, and let the calories turn straight into fat. But the truth isn't that simple. Weight gain doesn't depend on the time of day you eat. It depends on how much you eat over time compared to how much energy your body uses. In other words, your total calorie intake matters more than the clock. When you eat something, your body starts digesting it immediately, whether it's 8 a.m. or 10 p.m. Your metabolism doesn't suddenly shut down when you go to sleep. It may slow slightly, but it still processes food efficiently overnight. So where did the myth come from? Part of it may be behavioral. Late-night eating often includes snacks that are higher in sugar, salt, or fat, like chips, cookies, or fast food. These are easy to overeat, especially if you're tired or distracted. It's not the timing, it's the extra calories that make the difference. Some studies have shown a connection between late-night eating and weight gain, but usually in people who consistently overeat at night. For example, skipping meals during the day, then binging before bed. That kind of pattern can throw off hunger cues and lead to long-term overeating. There's also the sleep angle. Eating too close to bedtime can affect sleep quality for some people, especially if the meal is large or spicy. Poor sleep can, in turn, affect hormone levels that regulate hunger, and that can influence weight gain indirectly. But the food itself? It doesn't know what time it is. Your body doesn't store calories differently just because the sun went down. It's about what and how much you eat overall, not when you eat it. Coffee stunts your growth. For years, kids have been warned that drinking coffee will stunt their growth. It's one of those classic lines, right up there with "sit up straight" or "don't run with scissors." But despite how often it's said, there's no scientific evidence to support it. Coffee contains caffeine, a natural stimulant that affects the central nervous system. It can make you feel more alert, increase heart rate, and temporarily reduce tiredness. But it doesn't interfere with the growth plates in bones or stop the body from developing normally. Growth is mainly influenced by genetics, nutrition, sleep, and overall health, not by whether someone drinks coffee. The myth likely started decades ago when some early studies linked caffeine to lower bone density. But those studies didn't tell the whole story. Later research showed that the real issue wasn't the caffeine itself. It was that people who drank more caffeine often got less calcium in their diets. Calcium is important for building strong bones, especially in children and teens. But caffeine doesn't block growth. At most, it has a very mild effect on how the body handles calcium, and even that can be offset by getting enough from food or supplements. That's why coffee isn't off limits for growing teens. It just needs to be part of a balanced diet. Of course, too much caffeine can still cause problems like jitteriness, poor sleep, or upset stomachs, especially in younger people. But that's a short-term effect, not a long-term growth issue. In short, coffee isn't a growth blocker. It's just a drink with a strong reputation and a few misunderstood side effects. As long as it's consumed in moderation, it won't make you any shorter. It just might keep you up a little later. You can't get pregnant during your period. Many people believe that having sex during a period is a free pass to avoid pregnancy. It seems logical. After all, menstruation usually signals that you're not ovulating. But this idea isn't foolproof, and it overlooks how unpredictable the human body can be. Pregnancy happens when sperm fertilizes an egg. Ovulation, the release of that egg, typically occurs around the middle of the menstrual cycle. So in a standard 28-day cycle, ovulation usually happens around day 14, while menstruation happens at the beginning. Based on that schedule, the chance of pregnancy during a period seems low. But here's the catch. Not everyone has a textbook cycle. Some people have shorter cycles, irregular timing, or ovulate earlier than expected. If someone ovulates early, say around day 10, and has sex during their period, which could be around day 5 or 6, sperm could still be alive when the egg is released. That's because sperm can survive in the reproductive tract for up to 5 days. There's also the issue of misidentifying bleeding. Sometimes, spotting from ovulation or irregular cycles can be mistaken for a period. If someone has sex thinking they're menstruating, but they're actually close to ovulation, the chances of pregnancy increase. It's not likely to get pregnant during a period, but it's definitely possible, especially for people with irregular cycles or shorter gaps between menstruation and ovulation. And relying on timing alone is never a reliable method of birth control. The belief that periods provide total protection is based on an oversimplified view of how the menstrual cycle works. In reality, the body doesn't always follow the calendar. Fertility windows can shift, and sperm have more staying power than most people realize. Timing reduces the odds, but it doesn't eliminate the risk. You can catch up on lost sleep. After a late night or a week of poor sleep, it's tempting to believe you can just catch up over the weekend. Sleep in for a few extra hours and everything balances out. But that's not exactly how sleep works. Sleep isn't stored like money in a bank. You can't save it up in advance, and you can't fully pay off a running sleep debt by simply sleeping more later. Missing sleep takes a toll on your body and brain, one that's not always easy to reverse. When you don't get enough rest, the effects start quickly. Reaction times slow down, focus fades, and memory becomes less reliable. Over time, chronic sleep loss can increase the risk of heart disease, diabetes, and depression. While 1 or 2 nights of short sleep can often be recovered from with a longer rest, consistent sleep deprivation leads to deeper disruptions in your internal systems, especially your circadian rhythm, which keeps your body clock in sync. If you sleep 5 or 6 hours a night all week and then try to make up for it by sleeping 10 hours on Saturday, your body might feel slightly better, but your sleep quality and alertness may not fully return to normal. Oversleeping on the weekend can also throw off your rhythm, making it harder to fall asleep on time when the work week starts again. The most effective way to stay well rested is to get consistent, good quality sleep each night. That doesn't mean perfect sleep every time, but aiming for a steady schedule helps your body function the way it's designed to. Occasional recovery sleep is fine. It can help in the short term, but it's not a long-term solution. Regular rest is what your body actually needs. Alcohol kills brain cells. Alcohol doesn't exactly have a reputation for being brain-friendly. For years, people have repeated the idea that every drink you take kills off brain cells. It's a simple, scary image, but it's not quite accurate. The truth is, moderate alcohol consumption doesn't actually kill brain cells. That myth likely comes from early studies that misunderstood how alcohol affects the brain. When you drink, alcohol acts as a depressant. It slows down activity in the central nervous system, which can temporarily impair things like coordination, memory, and judgment. But those effects are mostly due to how alcohol interacts with neurotransmitters, chemical messengers in your brain, not because it's destroying neurons. Now, that doesn't mean alcohol has no impact. Chronic heavy drinking over long periods can definitely harm the brain. It can shrink certain brain regions, especially the frontal lobe, which is involved in decision-making and self-control. But again, this damage comes from long-term exposure and nutrient deficiencies, not because alcohol directly kills brain cells on contact. Another factor is how alcohol affects brain development. For teenagers and young adults, whose brains are still maturing, regular drinking can interfere with critical processes like memory formation and emotional regulation. So while it's not about killing cells outright, alcohol can still disrupt how the brain grows and functions. In extreme cases, alcohol abuse can lead to conditions like Wernicke-Korsakoff syndrome, often called wet brain, which is tied to a lack of vitamin B1. This condition involves serious memory problems, but even here, it's not that cells are being killed by alcohol alone. It's a combination of poor nutrition and prolonged misuse. So, while the image of alcohol zapping brain cells might be catchy, the reality is more about interference than destruction. Moderate drinking doesn't kill neurons, but that doesn't mean it's harmless either. Every basic life skill. Spotting lies. When someone's story changes depending on when or how they tell it, it can be a sign that the details aren't accurate. Spotting lies is the skill of identifying when information might not be truthful by paying attention to patterns, inconsistencies, and supporting evidence. It's less about relying on a single sign and more about gathering enough clues to make an informed judgment. At its most basic, this involves checking whether what's being said matches what you can verify. If a colleague claims a task is complete, but avoids showing the finished work, that gap can be worth looking into. In personal situations, hearing different versions of the same event from the same person may suggest missing or altered details. Non-verbal cues can add to the picture. A person might avoid answering directly, speak with unusual pauses, or offer excessive, unrelated detail. These signals don't automatically prove dishonesty. They're indicators that you may need to look closer. Asking clear, specific questions can help reveal whether information holds up. Truthful answers tend to remain consistent when explained multiple times, while fabricated ones may shift or lose detail under repetition. Comparing claims to reliable records, timelines, or first-hand observations is another way to confirm accuracy. It's important to remember that stress, fatigue, or nervousness can mimic the signs people often associate with lying. That's why spotting lies works best when multiple observations point in the same direction, rather than relying on a single behavior. Spotting lies is ultimately about using careful observation, follow-up questions, and fact-checking to decide whether the information in front of you is reliable. Holding eye contact. This basic skill is one of the most important for thriving in life. Looking directly into someone's eyes during conversation, even for just a few seconds, signals focus and presence in a way words alone cannot. Most people naturally do it briefly, but how long and how often it feels comfortable depends on the situation, the culture, and the relationship between the people involved. At its core, eye contact shows attention. With a friend, it can make a conversation feel more genuine. In a job interview, it signals engagement and confidence. Even a brief moment with a stranger, like thanking a cashier, can create a small but real sense of connection. It also shapes how messages are interpreted. A steady gaze while speaking often conveys honesty or certainty. Looking away too quickly might suggest nervousness, disinterest, or simply that someone is pausing to think. The meaning depends on context. During active listening, holding someone's gaze feels natural, while in moments of reflection, breaking eye contact may be expected. Cultural differences make this skill more nuanced. In some societies, direct eye contact is polite and respectful. In others, it can feel confrontational or inappropriate. Being aware of the setting helps you decide when and how to use it. Improving this skill doesn't take much. Practicing by maintaining eye contact just a few seconds longer in daily interactions makes it easier and more natural over time. What seems like a small action is actually a powerful tool for communication, building trust, and showing genuine presence in any interaction. The art of saying no. Most people face moments when they're asked to take on something they don't have the time, energy, or desire for. It might be an extra project at work, a favor from a friend, or an invitation to an event when you'd rather rest. Knowing how to turn down these requests in a clear, respectful way is an important part of managing your time and protecting your priorities. At its core, saying no is about setting boundaries. Without it, it's easy to become overcommitted, stressed, and less effective in the things that matter most. The key is to decline in a way that is direct but considerate. For example, instead of giving vague excuses, you might simply say, "I can't take this on right now." Adding a short explanation can help the other person understand without leaving room for unnecessary negotiation. One reason people struggle with saying no is the fear of disappointing others or being seen as unhelpful. But constantly agreeing to every request often leads to burnout and frustration. By identifying situations where agreeing would cause you to sacrifice personal time, delay your own goals, or take on unhealthy stress, you can decide when it's worth standing firm. Practicing in low-pressure situations can make the skill easier to use when it counts. Turning down a store promotion, declining a subscription offer, or saying no to an extra task you can't reasonably fit in are all ways to build confidence. When done well, saying no doesn't harm relationships, it preserves them. It allows you to focus on commitments that align with your values and capacity, helping you maintain balance and effectiveness in both personal and professional life. First principles thinking. Breaking a problem down into its simplest parts before looking for a solution is the foundation of first principles thinking. This skill involves stripping away assumptions, habits, and comparisons to focus only on what is undeniably true. From there, you build your understanding back up using logic and evidence rather than relying on how things have always been done. At its core, first principles thinking starts with asking what the fundamental facts are. For example, if you want to start exercising but believe you need an expensive gym membership, you can break the idea down. The goal is physical activity, not necessarily a gym. From that basic truth, you might see that bodyweight exercises at home or walking outdoors could meet the same need. This approach works in professional settings too. If a team's process feels inefficient, instead of copying a competitor's method, you identify the actual requirements, the tasks that must be done, the resources available, and the outcome you want. Then you design the process from the ground up, removing unnecessary steps. First principles thinking can also help in personal decision-making. If you're considering a major purchase, instead of following the usual path of comparing similar products, you first define the essential purpose it needs to serve. This can lead to more cost-effective or creative solutions. The challenge is that this method takes more effort up front than relying on existing models or common advice. However, it often produces better, more tailored results because it's based on fundamentals rather than assumptions. First principles thinking is a practical way to solve problems and make decisions by reducing them to their basic truths and building solutions logically from the ground up. Emotional intelligence. Noticing when you're starting to feel frustrated in a conversation and choosing to stay calm is an example of emotional intelligence. This skill is the ability to recognize, understand, and manage your own emotions, while also recognizing and responding appropriately to the emotions of others. It plays a role in how you communicate, solve problems, and maintain relationships. At its core, emotional intelligence begins with self-awareness. This means paying attention to your feelings and the situations that trigger them. For example, knowing that you tend to become impatient in long meetings helps you prepare strategies to stay engaged. The next step is self-regulation, being able to pause before reacting and choosing a response that matches the situation. It also includes social awareness, which is noticing emotional cues in others. A coworker's short replies may signal stress, or a friend's upbeat tone may show excitement. Understanding these signals helps you respond in ways that strengthen the interaction. Finally, emotional intelligence involves relationship management. Using this awareness to communicate clearly, resolve conflicts, and build trust. In everyday life, this can be as simple as listening without interrupting when someone is upset, giving constructive feedback without sounding harsh, or calming yourself before responding to criticism. Over time, these small actions help reduce misunderstandings and create more productive exchanges. Developing emotional intelligence often involves practicing empathy, reflecting on past interactions, and being open to feedback about your communication style. Emotional intelligence is a practical skill that improves how you handle your own emotions and how you respond to the emotions of others, leading to clearer communication and stronger connections in both personal and professional settings. Being anti-fragile. Making a mistake at work, learning from it, and performing better next time is an example of being anti-fragile. This skill is about benefiting from stress, challenges, or setbacks instead of being weakened by them. It's not just about surviving difficulties. It's about using them to improve. At its core, being anti-fragile means adapting in a way that leaves you stronger than before. If a presentation doesn't go as planned, you review what went wrong, adjust your approach, and deliver more effectively in the future. The stress from the first experience becomes a source of growth. This differs from simple resilience, which is about returning to the same level after a setback. Anti-fragility involves moving to a higher level. Everyday examples include building physical strength through exercise, where controlled stress on muscles makes them stronger, or learning new skills after a challenging project instead of avoiding similar work in the future. Even small adjustments, like improving your budgeting habits after an unexpected expense, show how setbacks can lead to better systems. Being anti-fragile often involves preparation and experimentation. You try new approaches, accept that some will fail, and use the lessons to improve your strategy. It also means not avoiding discomfort entirely, because the right kind of stress can reveal weaknesses you can address. In workplaces, people who are anti-fragile often adapt faster to change because they've learned to treat problems as opportunities for refinement. In personal life, it can mean developing stronger relationships after working through disagreements rather than avoiding conflict. Being anti-fragile is a skill that turns pressure, mistakes, and uncertainty into tools for long-term improvement, helping you grow stronger each time you face challenges. Taming your inner critic. The inner critic is the internal voice that points out mistakes, doubts abilities, and questions decisions. For many people, it appears in everyday situations, like preparing for a presentation, trying something new, or reviewing past choices. While it can sometimes push you to prepare better, an overactive inner critic can lead to hesitation, stress, and missed opportunities. At its core, the inner critic is a mental habit formed from past experiences, feedback, and personal expectations. It often uses exaggerated language, turning small errors into signs of failure or assuming others will judge you harshly. Left unchecked, this voice can become the default filter for how you interpret your actions. Taming it begins with awareness. The first step is noticing when the voice appears and identifying the situations that trigger it. For example, a person might realize their inner critic is most active during job interviews or after social interactions. Recognizing these patterns makes it easier to separate helpful self-assessment from unhelpful self-sabotage. Once identified, the tone and content of these thoughts can be challenged. This can mean replacing blanket statements like, "I always mess up," with specific, balanced ones such as, "That part could have been better, but the rest went well." Another practical approach is to view mistakes as information for improvement rather than proof of inadequacy. External perspective also helps. Talking to a friend, mentor, or colleague can counter distorted self-judgments with more realistic feedback. Over time, practicing self-compassion, treating yourself as you would a capable friend, can shift the default tone of your self-talk. By consistently addressing and reframing the inner critic's messages, you create space for more constructive thoughts, allowing you to approach challenges with clarity and confidence, rather than constant self-doubt. Overcoming imposter syndrome. Imposter syndrome is the persistent feeling that you are less capable than others think, despite evidence of your skills or accomplishments. It can happen in workplaces, classrooms, or any setting where expectations are high, and it often leads people to doubt themselves, even when they are performing well. At its core, imposter syndrome is not about a lack of ability, but about a mismatch between how you see yourself and how others see you. Someone who gets a promotion might believe it was due to luck rather than competence. A student who receives top grades may still feel they do not truly understand the material. These thoughts create unnecessary stress and can prevent people from taking on new opportunities. Overcoming it begins with recognizing the signs. Common patterns include discounting praise, comparing yourself harshly to others, or assuming mistakes will reveal you as a fraud. Once identified, these thoughts can be challenged by focusing on facts rather than feelings. For example, reviewing completed projects, positive feedback, or past problem-solving successes provides concrete evidence of ability. Another practical step is to talk openly about these feelings with trusted peers or mentors. Many people experience imposter syndrome, and hearing similar experiences from others can normalize the challenge and reduce its intensity. Setting realistic expectations for yourself also matters. Perfection is rarely necessary for success, and mistakes are part of growth. Small changes in behavior can reinforce a healthier mindset. Accepting compliments without deflection, documenting your achievements, and tracking progress over time help build a more accurate self-assessment. By consistently addressing the gap between perception and reality, imposter syndrome can be reduced, allowing you to focus energy on learning, improving, and contributing rather than on questioning whether you belong. Comfort zone expansion. Doing something you're not used to, even in a small way, is the start of comfort zone expansion. This skill is about gradually increasing your tolerance for new or challenging experiences, so you can handle a wider range of situations with confidence. It doesn't require big leaps. Steady, manageable steps can build the same long-term benefits. At its core, comfort zone expansion happens when you push slightly beyond what feels familiar. This could mean speaking up in a meeting when you usually stay quiet, trying a new type of exercise, or learning to use unfamiliar technology. Each time you succeed, even in a small way, your sense of what's possible grows. The process often begins with identifying areas where you feel limited. For example, if public speaking makes you uncomfortable, you might start by contributing one comment in a small group before working up to presenting to a larger audience. If meeting new people feels awkward, you might begin by having short conversations in low-pressure settings. These controlled challenges let you adapt without becoming overwhelmed. Expanding your comfort zone can also make you more adaptable. Situations that once felt stressful become easier to manage, freeing up mental energy for problem solving and learning. In a workplace, this can mean adjusting quickly to new tools or procedures. In personal life, it can mean feeling at ease in unfamiliar environments, from traveling to joining new activities. This skill improves with repetition. The more you step into slightly uncomfortable territory and succeed, the more you normalize it, making future challenges feel less intimidating. Comfort zone expansion is a practical way to build adaptability, confidence, and resilience by steadily taking on experiences that stretch your limits in manageable steps. Knowing your why. Knowing your why means understanding the deeper reason behind your actions and decisions. It is the personal motivation that drives you to start something, keep going when it gets difficult, and make choices that align with what matters most to you. At the most basic level, it's the answer to the question, why am I doing this? For example, if you're pursuing a degree, your why might be to qualify for a certain career, to gain financial independence, or to set an example for your family. If you're working long hours at a job, your why could be to build savings for a home, to gain experience for a better position, or to support loved ones. Having a clear why makes it easier to stay focused and committed. Without it, it's easy to lose motivation when faced with setbacks. For instance, someone training for a marathon without a specific reason may give up when the runs get harder. But someone whose why is to raise money for a cause they care about is more likely to push through. Defining your why often takes reflection. It helps to think about what outcomes matter most to you, what values guide your choices, and what you want your efforts to lead to. Writing this down can make it easier to recall during challenging times. Once you know your why, it can guide decisions both big and small. It helps you say yes to things that move you closer to your goals and no to things that pull you away from them. Knowing your why is a practical skill because it creates direction, filters distractions, and makes your actions more intentional in both personal and professional life. Every bullshit advice debunked. Follow your heart. Sometimes we're drawn to something without fully understanding why. A job, a relationship, a decision. It just feels right. That's the basic idea behind follow your heart. It suggests that deep down, your emotions can guide you better than logic alone. At face value, it's appealing. Logic is cold. Emotions are personal. And in a world full of external pressure, expectations, advice, rules, tuning into what you really want feels like a path to authenticity. Instead of overthinking every choice, the idea is to trust your gut and move toward what feels meaningful. But follow your heart isn't always the simplest compass. Emotions are messy. They can be short-term reactions influenced by fear, desire, nostalgia, or anxiety. Someone might feel drawn to a toxic ex or tempted to quit a job on impulse, only to regret it later. Feelings reflect your state in the moment, not necessarily what's best long-term. That's why this advice can be misleading when taken at face value. A more practical approach might be, listen to your emotions, but filter them through reflection. For instance, wanting to move to a new city might come from restlessness, or it might point to a real need for change. The key is knowing the difference. Even neuroscience supports a balance. The brain's emotional centers and rational centers constantly interact. We're wired to use both, not one over the other. Emotional signals can point you towards something important, but reason helps you weigh the risks and outcomes. So while follow your heart speaks to an important truth, that your desires matter, it works best when paired with self-awareness. Emotions shouldn't be ignored, but they also shouldn't be handed the steering wheel without question. No pain, no gain. This is one of those phrases that shows up everywhere, from gym walls to motivational posters. But behind the slogan is a simple idea. Progress often comes with discomfort. At its core, this concept means that growth, whether physical or mental, typically requires effort, and that effort usually isn't pleasant. In the gym, pushing muscles beyond their comfort zone causes micro tears, which the body then repairs, making them stronger. The soreness that follows a workout isn't a sign of failure. It's a sign that change is underway. But it goes beyond exercise. Think about learning a new skill. The early stages are usually filled with mistakes, confusion, and frustration. That mental strain is a form of pain too. It forces the brain to build new pathways, and over time, what once felt impossible becomes automatic. The discomfort fades, but the ability stays. Even emotional development follows a similar pattern. Facing fears, having tough conversations, or leaving behind bad habits can feel deeply uncomfortable. But avoiding that discomfort often means staying stuck. Short-term pain can be the cost of long-term growth. That said, not all pain leads to gain. The point isn't to seek suffering for its own sake, but to recognize that some degree of struggle is often part of the process. Discomfort doesn't always mean danger. It might mean you're on the edge of improvement. So whether it's lifting heavier, studying longer, or making a hard decision, the principle holds. Challenge is what drives change. Growth rarely happens in the comfort zone, and effort that feels easy probably isn't pushing your limits. No pain, no gain is a reminder that progress usually demands something in return, time, energy, or discomfort, but that the payoff eventually is worth it. Everything will work out if you stay positive. Staying positive sounds like harmless advice, an easy way to cope when life doesn't go as planned. But the idea that everything will work out if you just maintain a positive attitude has some major gaps. At its core, this belief assumes that optimism alone can control outcomes. The logic is simple: stay upbeat, and things will eventually fall into place. It encourages people to reframe challenges, focus on solutions, and keep hope alive. In that sense, it can be helpful. Positivity has been shown to improve resilience and reduce stress. It can motivate people to take action rather than give up. But that's only part of the story. Where this idea gets tricky is when it oversimplifies complex problems. Not everything improves just because you smile through it. A person dealing with chronic illness, job loss, or systemic barriers can't simply think positive their way to resolution. Real change often requires practical steps, resources, support, and time, none of which automatically come from a good attitude. This mindset can also unintentionally place blame on the individual. If things don't work out, was it because they weren't positive enough? That kind of thinking shifts focus away from real obstacles and towards self-blame. It also discourages people from expressing frustration or grief, emotions that are valid and necessary for growth. Positivity, in a balanced form, can absolutely help people cope. It supports perseverance, reframes setbacks, and keeps motivation alive. But the belief that everything will resolve if you just stay cheerful glosses over the complexity of real-life struggles. Optimism is a useful tool, not a guarantee. Knowing when to use it and when to get practical or seek help makes the difference between blind hope and grounded action. The customer is always right. A customer walks into a store, complains loudly, demands a refund, and quotes the line, "The customer is always right." It's a phrase that's been used for decades, a way to remind businesses to prioritize the people they serve. But behind the slogan is a more complicated reality. The idea began as a business strategy in the early 1900s. Retail pioneers used it to shift the focus away from rigid policies and toward customer satisfaction. The message was simple: treat customers with respect, listen to their concerns, and make them feel valued. It was a reaction against an earlier era where buyers had little recourse when things went wrong. But over time, the phrase was taken too literally. "The customer is always right" began to imply that no matter how rude, unreasonable, or even dishonest someone is, they should get what they want. And that's where the problems start. In practice, not every customer is right. Some abuse policies, mistreat staff, or expect unrealistic service. When companies bend over backward to please everyone, it often comes at a cost, usually to employees. Studies show that when businesses prioritize customer satisfaction at all costs, it can lead to burnout, high turnover, and toxic work environments. There's also a balance to maintain. Businesses succeed when they listen to feedback and fix real issues, but they also need clear boundaries. A customer who constantly returns used items, harasses staff, or expects exceptions isn't helping the company grow. They're exploiting it. The original spirit of the phrase wasn't about blind obedience. It was about trust, assuming most people are honest, and building loyalty by treating them well. But respect goes both ways. And running a healthy business means supporting the people who serve, not just the ones being served. Love conquers all. When life gets difficult, people often turn to the idea that love can solve anything. Love conquers all is one of those sweeping phrases that sounds comforting, but what does it actually mean? At face value, it suggests that love is powerful enough to overcome any obstacle. That if people care about each other deeply enough, things like distance, hardship, disagreement, or even failure don't stand a chance. The logic here is simple. Emotional connection creates resilience. Two people navigating a crisis might endure it better if they feel supported. A family facing financial strain might pull together, not fall apart, if there's a strong bond at the center. The idea applies across types of relationships: romantic, platonic, familial. It's not just about passion or romance. It's about loyalty, understanding, and shared effort. In that sense, love conquers all isn't saying that love magically removes problems. It's saying that love changes how people respond to them. But there's a practical side to consider. Love doesn't erase consequences or fix bad decisions. A toxic dynamic doesn't become healthy just because love is involved. There are limits. Mutual respect, communication, and accountability matter. Without those, love can't carry the weight alone. Still, love does often motivate people to try harder, forgive more easily, and show up even when it's inconvenient. A parent working 2 jobs might keep going because they love their child. A friend might drive through the night just to be there during a tough moment. These aren't grand gestures. They're quiet signs that love can push people past their usual limits. So while love might not literally conquer every obstacle, it often shifts the odds. It becomes the reason people persist, compromise, or rebuild. That's where its real strength lies, not in removing struggle, but in reshaping how people face it. You can be anything you want to be. A child hears it in classrooms, on TV, even printed on pencil cases. You can be anything you want to be. It's meant to inspire, to encourage ambition, confidence, and a sense of limitless possibility. But as people grow up, the cracks in that message start to show. The idea behind it is rooted in motivation. If you tell someone they can achieve anything, they might try harder, aim higher, or persist through failure. In that sense, it's about giving permission to dream, especially important for kids who feel boxed in by circumstance, stereotypes, or doubt. But in reality, not every dream is equally reachable. Talent, opportunity, resources, timing, all play a role. Someone might want to be a professional athlete, but lack the physical traits or early training needed. Another might dream of being an astronaut without access to the right education or support. Saying you can be anything oversimplifies the real-world limits that people face. It also creates pressure. If success is simply a matter of wanting it enough, then failure starts to look like a personal flaw. People begin to blame themselves for not achieving unrealistic goals, even when the odds were never in their favor. A more honest message might be, you can pursue anything you're willing to work toward, adapt for, and realistically improve in. Passion is important, but so are skill, feedback, and flexibility. Sometimes the path you wanted isn't the one that fits, and learning to pivot isn't a sign of failure, it's growth. The original phrase isn't useless, it just needs context. Telling someone they can be anything makes more sense when followed by tools, truth, and guidance, because belief alone isn't enough. It's what you build with that belief that really matters. Never give up. This is one of those kind of advice that shows up everywhere, in graduation speeches, on motivational posters, and in the final minutes of sports movies. The message is clear. If you just keep pushing, success will come. And for certain situations, that persistence really does matter. Learning a new skill, building a career, recovering from a setback, these all take time and resilience. But as a one-size-fits-all rule, never give up can be misleading. Not all paths are worth sticking to. Sometimes quitting is actually the smart choice. There's a well-known psychological trap called the sunk cost fallacy. It's the idea that the more time, money, or effort we've already spent on something, the harder it is to walk away, even if it's clearly not working. People stay in failing business ventures because they've already invested years. Or they stick with degrees they no longer care about because they're almost done. The more you've given, the more pressure you feel to see it through, even when the payoff no longer makes sense. The problem is, effort alone doesn't guarantee results. Sticking with something just because you started it can waste resources and delay better opportunities. It's not always about grinding harder sometimes, it's about recognizing when a change is needed. There's a difference between giving up too soon and knowing when to redirect your energy. Smart quitting isn't laziness. It's a form of strategy. It means recognizing dead ends, cutting losses, and making room for something that might work better. Never give up sounds inspiring, but real progress depends on more than determination. It depends on perspective, the ability to tell the difference between a challenge worth pushing through and a path worth leaving behind. Be yourself. Everyone has heard the advice, be yourself. It's often the first thing people say when you're facing something stressful, like a job interview, a first date, or a big presentation. It sounds simple and reassuring. Just show up as who you truly are, and things will fall into place. But when you think about it, this advice can feel more confusing than comforting. How do you be yourself when you naturally act differently around different people? How do you stay true to who you are when you're constantly growing and changing? Most of us adjust our behavior depending on the situation. You're not the same at work as you are with close friends. And that doesn't mean you're being fake, it means you're adaptable. Human behavior shifts with context, yet that doesn't change your core identity. Your tone, body language, or sense of humor may vary, but you're still you. The problem with be yourself is that it treats identity like a fixed, unchanging thing. Like there's only one true version of you to protect at all costs. In reality, personality is flexible. People grow, pick up new habits, change opinions, and learn different ways to interact with the world. Telling someone to just be yourself can trap them in a narrow version of who they think they should be. It can also discourage trying new things. Someone practicing assertiveness for the first time might feel inauthentic. But growth often begins with uncomfortable experiments. Exploring new behaviors doesn't betray your identity, it expands it. Being yourself isn't about locking into a permanent version of who you are. It's about knowing your values, being honest, and making space for change. The goal isn't to freeze yourself in place, but to keep discovering who you can become, even if that person looks different from who you started as. Everything happens for a reason. A car swerves, a job offer falls through, someone you trust walks away. In the moment, it feels senseless, like life is just tossing events at random. But soon after, people start telling stories. Maybe it was fate. Maybe it was the universe closing one door so another could open. We crave patterns, explanations, some thread to tie it all together. This is where a popular idea quietly steps in. The belief that every event, no matter how painful, has a deeper purpose. It doesn't ask for proof. It just soothes. And for many, that comfort is enough. But here's the catch. Not every event carries a hidden message. A child gets sick. A business collapses. A natural disaster strikes. Sometimes, bad things happen without any larger narrative. The human brain, however, doesn't like gaps. When randomness enters our lives, we instinctively reach for meaning. Psychologists call this pattern-seeking behavior, and it's deeply rooted in how we cope. There's a difference between making meaning and assuming meaning was already there. You can choose to grow after something awful. You can learn, adapt, recover. But that's not the same as saying it was meant to be. One is an active response. The other is a passive assumption. The danger lies in that passivity. Believing everything happens for a reason can lead to inaction, staying in toxic relationships, delaying decisions, or waiting for life to sort itself out. It can also cause people to rationalize injustice or blame victims, trying to fit every tragedy into a tidy moral arc. Not everything is part of a grand plan, but that doesn't mean you're powerless. Meaning isn't always found. Sometimes it's built, deliberately, in the aftermath. And that's a different kind of strength. Follow your passion. Many people believe that building a career means finding a single passion and following it relentlessly. It's a neat story. Discover what you love, then dedicate your life to it. But real-life career journeys are rarely that simple or straightforward. For starters, not everyone has one clear passion. Interests can be varied and shift over time. Waiting for that perfect calling to magically appear can create pressure and frustration, making you feel like you're falling behind if you haven't found the one. Liking something doesn't always mean you'll be good at it either. Take photography, for example. You might love taking pictures, but find it challenging to make a living from it. And even when a hobby turns into a job, the pressures of deadlines, clients, and finances can turn enjoyment into stress. There's also the reality of opportunity. Some passions align better with job markets than others. Someone fascinated by ancient coins may find limited career options, while a passion for data analysis could open many doors. This imbalance means that following passion alone isn't always practical. A more effective approach is what some call passion through practice. Instead of waiting for passion to strike fully formed, start by developing skills in areas that genuinely interest you. As your competence and confidence grow, so often does your passion. Ultimately, building a fulfilling career involves more than just passion. It requires balancing interests with skill development, seizing opportunities, and staying adaptable. Rather than chasing an elusive passion, it's often wiser to cultivate it gradually along the way. Everyday complex things. Overthinking. You replay a conversation in your head, revise a text 5 times before sending it, or can't stop weighing every possible outcome. That's overthinking. Overthinking happens when your mind gets stuck in a loop of analysis, second-guessing, or prediction. It's not the same as being thoughtful or careful. Overthinking takes a simple thought or decision and stretches it out longer than it needs to be, often without reaching a clear conclusion. It can show up in 2 main forms. The first is rumination, going over something that already happened, like a mistake or an awkward moment. The second is worry, imagining what could go wrong in the future. In both cases, your brain is trying to problem solve, but instead of moving forward, it circles the same points repeatedly. This mental looping uses up attention and energy. It can make decision-making harder, not easier. For example, if you're overthinking what to wear to an event, you might waste time swapping options without ever feeling confident. Or if you're overthinking an email, you may delay sending it entirely. Overthinking is linked to anxiety and stress. When the brain senses uncertainty or risk, it starts scanning for possible issues. This can be useful in moderation, but when it becomes excessive, it disrupts focus, sleep, and performance. You might lie awake at night, going over a situation that has no clear solution. Some people are more prone to overthinking than others, depending on personality, mood, or recent experiences. But it's also influenced by habits and environment. Constant decision fatigue, information overload, or social pressure can all make it worse. Overthinking feels like trying to prepare or protect yourself, but often it just adds mental weight. Recognizing the pattern is the first step in learning how to break it. Flow state. You sit down to work, time passes without you noticing, and by the end, you've made real progress without feeling distracted. That's a flow state. Flow is a mental condition where your attention becomes fully absorbed in an activity. You're not multitasking or checking the clock. Your thoughts are focused, your actions feel smooth, and your mind isn't drifting. This happens when you're doing something that challenges you just enough to keep you engaged, not so hard that it's frustrating, and not so easy that it's boring. Flow can happen in many situations. It might be while writing, coding, drawing, or even playing a sport. The task usually has clear goals, immediate feedback, and requires concentration. For example, a musician practicing a piece might lose track of time, or someone solving a puzzle might forget about everything else until it's done. In the brain, flow involves a balance of chemicals like dopamine and norepinephrine, which support focus and motivation, and a drop in activity in the parts responsible for self-monitoring. That's why people in flow often report losing awareness of themselves or their surroundings. They're fully in the task. Flow also depends on your environment. Interruptions, background noise, or frequent task switching can break it. That's why it's more likely to happen when you're alone, undistracted, and working with purpose. Some people even design their routines around maximizing flow by setting up quiet blocks of time or removing distractions. Flow is useful because it improves focus, efficiency, and satisfaction. People tend to perform better and feel more invested in what they're doing. It doesn't require talent, just the right conditions and a task that's worth your attention. Once those align, flow does the rest. Love. Love is one of the most familiar emotions in daily life, whether it's a tight hug, a text from someone you care about, or the comfort of being around close friends and family. At its core, love is a biological and emotional state that helps humans bond and cooperate. It's not just one feeling, but a combination of behaviors and brain chemicals that support attachment, trust, and care. From an evolutionary perspective, love helped early humans form stable relationships, raise children together, and survive as social groups. When someone feels love, the brain activates several systems at once. Dopamine creates a sense of pleasure and motivation, making time with loved ones feel rewarding. Oxytocin and vasopressin are hormones that promote closeness and bonding, especially during physical touch like hugging or holding hands. These brain chemicals reinforce the connection and make people more likely to support and protect each other. Love isn't limited to romance. It appears in friendships, families, and even toward pets. The brain doesn't necessarily distinguish between these types. It adjusts the intensity and patterns depending on the context. For example, parental love activates similar pathways as romantic love, but with more focus on nurturing and less on desire. Cultural factors shape how people express love. In some places, it's shown through words and gifts. In others, through shared time or acts of service. But the feeling underneath, the drive to connect and care, is universal. While love may feel mysterious, it follows patterns that science can observe and explain. It's an essential part of how humans relate to each other, helping maintain relationships that make everyday life more secure, cooperative, and meaningful. Consciousness. Right now, you're watching this video, hearing this voice, processing what it means. That's consciousness in action. It's your ongoing experience of the world and yourself. At its most basic level, consciousness is your awareness. When you open your eyes and recognize your surroundings, when you feel hunger or remember where you left your keys, your brain is producing conscious experience. It combines what you sense with what you know and creates a moment-by-moment stream of awareness. That stream isn't all or nothing. There are levels to it. You can be fully alert, groggy, focused, distracted, or even asleep and dreaming. Each of those states reflects a different pattern of brain activity. For example, during deep sleep, your brain slows down and disconnects from sensory input. During dreams, it becomes internally active, generating vivid scenes and emotions without any outside trigger. When you're awake, consciousness links everything. Your senses, your thoughts, your memories, your decisions. It also has limits. You're only aware of a small part of what your brain is doing. You're not conscious of your heart beating or your liver functioning, even though those are essential processes. Your brain filters out most background data and focuses attention on a few things at a time, like this screen, this sound, this explanation. Scientists still debate how the brain turns physical activity into conscious experience. But what's clear is that it depends on complex networks of neurons communicating rapidly. Damage to certain parts of the brain can change or reduce consciousness, while stimulation in others can restore it. So while the exact mechanism remains unclear, the function is clear. Consciousness lets you track the world around you, reflect on it, and respond, all in real time. AI. You've probably already used AI today without even noticing. Whether it was your phone predicting the next word you were about to type, a voice assistant answering a question, or a streaming app suggesting what to watch next, all of that involves artificial intelligence. AI, or artificial intelligence, refers to computer systems designed to perform tasks that normally require human thinking. That includes recognizing patterns, understanding language, making decisions, and even learning from experience. At its core, AI is about training machines to process information, make predictions, and improve performance over time. Most everyday AI works by analyzing large amounts of data. For example, when you use a navigation app, it doesn't just show a map. It collects real-time traffic data from thousands of other users and uses AI to suggest the fastest route. When you scroll through social media, AI decides which posts you're most likely to engage with based on your past behavior. There are different types of AI. Some are rule-based, following a fixed set of instructions. Others, like machine learning systems, improve as they process more data. A more advanced form, called generative AI, can create new content like images, music, or text by spotting patterns in the material it was trained on. You'll also see AI in customer service chatbots, fraud detection tools, grammar checkers, online shopping recommendations, and even facial recognition in security systems. It doesn't think like a human, but it can solve specific problems very efficiently. Although it sounds complex, AI is really just software that helps machines do useful things with information. It's become a behind-the-scenes part of daily life, quietly helping systems run faster, smoother, and smarter. Dreaming. You close your eyes at night, and hours later you wake up remembering something strange. Maybe you were flying, or back in school, or speaking a language you don't know. That's dreaming. Dreaming is what your brain does while you sleep, especially during a stage called REM, short for rapid eye movement. During REM sleep, your brain becomes more active. Your eyes move quickly under your eyelids, your heart rate increases slightly, and most of your muscles are temporarily turned off. This is when most vivid dreams happen. Even though your body is resting, your brain stays busy. It pulls from memory, emotion, recent experiences, and imagination, stitching these pieces together into scenes and events. That's why dreams often feel familiar, but also bizarre. They combine real elements in ways that wouldn't normally happen when you're awake. Not all dreams are stories. Some are just flashes of images or disconnected events. Others can feel realistic and follow a clear sequence like a short film. You might not remember most of them, but dreaming happens several times each night, during every REM cycle. Scientists still don't fully understand why we dream, but there are a few ideas. One is that dreams help your brain process emotions and experiences. Another is that they assist with memory, sorting, storing, and even rehearsing information. Some researchers also think dreams might be your brain's way of maintaining activity and checking its systems while the body rests. What's clear is that dreaming is a normal part of sleep. It shows that even when you're unconscious, your brain is still working, running simulations and blending thoughts in ways that don't follow everyday logic. You're not just resting, you're experiencing, even if you don't remember it. Time. You check the clock before heading out, set alarms, and make appointments. That's time organizing your day. Time is simply the way we measure change. When something moves, grows, or happens, we recognize it over time. It gives structure to events so we can place them in order. What came before, what's happening now, and what's coming next. The most basic way we track time is with regular, repeating patterns. A day is one full rotation of Earth. A year is one full trip around the sun. These natural cycles became the foundation for calendars and clocks. When you glance at your watch or phone, you're looking at a system humans built to divide these cycles into smaller, manageable parts. Hours, minutes, and seconds. We also experience time in a personal way. Waiting 5 minutes in traffic can feel much longer than 5 minutes scrolling on your phone. That's because how we feel time passing doesn't always match the clock. Our attention, emotions, and activity level can all influence how we perceive it. In daily life, we rely on time to stay coordinated. Buses run on schedules, classes start at set hours. Even cooking dinner depends on timers. Time allows people to plan, meet, and work together in sync. Over the years, time also helps us track growth and progress. Birthdays mark age. Calendars help remember past events. We use timelines to understand history and deadlines to get things done. In short, time is a system we use to organize change, keep life running smoothly, and make sense of what's happening around us. Wi-Fi. You unlock your phone, tap an app, and a second later, you're watching a video. That's Wi-Fi at work, letting devices connect to the internet without using cables. Wi-Fi is a way of sending and receiving data using radio waves. Instead of plugging your phone or laptop into a wire, your device connects to a router. That router is plugged into the internet through a cable, but it broadcasts a wireless signal that your device can pick up. Think of the router as a small radio tower inside your home. Inside the router, data comes from your internet provider through a wired connection. The router then converts that data into a wireless signal and sends it out in all directions. When your device is in range, it listens for that signal and responds. This back and forth exchange lets you stream videos, load websites, or send messages. Wi-Fi doesn't travel very far, usually just within a house or building. That's why when you leave home, your phone switches to mobile data. Thick walls or interference from other electronics can also weaken the signal. Most homes and public spaces use Wi-Fi because it's simple and efficient. You can connect multiple devices at once, and you don't have to run cables everywhere. Routers can also use different frequency bands, like 2.4 GHz or 5 GHz, which affect speed and range. Higher frequencies offer faster speeds but work best at shorter distances. Wi-Fi is updated over time with newer standards that improve speed and reliability. These updates help keep up with the growing demand from devices like smart TVs, game consoles, and even appliances. From scrolling social media to downloading large files, Wi-Fi is the invisible link that makes internet access fast, easy, and wireless inside your everyday spaces. Empathy. You've probably felt it before. Someone else is upset, and suddenly you feel a bit of that emotion too. That's empathy. It's the ability to understand and share what someone else is going through, even if you're not in their situation. Empathy isn't just being nice or polite. It's a built-in response that helps us connect with others. When you see a friend stressed before a big presentation, and your stomach knots up a little, that's your brain simulating their experience. You're not just observing, you're internally mirroring their emotional state. This happens because of how our brains are wired. Certain cells called mirror neurons activate when we see someone experiencing something, especially emotions. These neurons allow us to mentally step into another person's shoes. It's not perfect, but it gives us a rough version of their feelings. Empathy comes in different forms. Cognitive empathy is when you understand what someone is feeling. Emotional empathy is when you actually feel some version of their emotion. Then there's compassionate empathy, when that feeling moves you to help. Everyday examples are everywhere. When you slow down to comfort someone who's had a bad day, or when you wince watching someone trip. Those small reactions are built on empathy. It helps people form friendships, support each other, and function in social groups. But empathy isn't automatic all the time. Stress, fatigue, or even unfamiliarity can reduce how empathetic we feel in a given moment. Still, it's a skill that can be strengthened with awareness and practice. Empathy isn't just an emotional response. It's a mental tool that helps us understand one another and build better social connections. Déjà vu. This is one of the most common real-life glitches. A strange sensation most of us have felt at least once. It's the uncanny feeling that the present moment is repeating itself, as if we've already stood here, heard these words, or seen this exact scene before. Surveys suggest that nearly 2/3 of people experience déjà vu in their lifetime. Across history, the phenomenon has been given many meanings. In ancient traditions, it was linked to reincarnation, explained as memories from previous lives. In the 19th century, some writers described it as a glimpse of dreams bleeding into waking reality. But modern neuroscience offers a more grounded explanation. Researchers have found that déjà vu happens when the brain's recognition system briefly misfires. Normally, the hippocampus distinguishes between new experiences and stored memories. But sometimes, because of stress, fatigue, or small timing errors in neural circuits, the present is mistakenly flagged as familiar. Functional MRI studies have observed this false signal in areas of the brain that handle recognition and recollection. What feels like stepping back into the past is often just two memory pathways falling out of sync. Clinical reports add to the picture. Some people with temporal lobe epilepsy experience déjà vu just before seizures, suggesting abnormal electrical activity can trigger the effect. Yet the vast majority of episodes happen in healthy individuals, showing how easy it is for perception and memory to overlap. Culturally mysterious, but scientifically ordinary, déjà vu reveals the fragile line between recognition and experience. The fact to remember is that déjà vu isn't a glitch in time or proof of past lives. It's a moment when the brain's memory system stumbles, briefly convincing us we've lived the present before. Biggest questions of life. Why is there something rather than nothing? Out of all the big questions, this one sounds the simplest, yet it's one of the hardest to answer. Why is there something instead of nothing? When we say something, we mean everything. Matter, energy, space, time, galaxies, planets, thoughts, people, everything that exists. And nothing isn't just empty space. It's the absence of space, no atoms, no time, not even a vacuum, just nothing at all. The strange part is, we don't know why there's something. In fact, there's no obvious reason the universe had to exist. From a logical standpoint, nothing seems easier. It doesn't need rules, energy, or structure. It just isn't. Some scientists and philosophers think the universe might have come from a quantum fluctuation, a tiny blip in a vacuum that created particles, which then exploded into the universe we see. But even then, you have to ask, Where did that vacuum come from? Why were the laws of physics already there? Others argue that nothingness might be unstable, that given enough time, something had to happen. Still, that idea assumes time already existed, and that's part of the problem. The moment you imagine a process or a cause, you're already inside of something. There's also a view that maybe nothing was never an option. That reality, in some form, had to exist. Not because of a reason, but because existence is the default. It's not very satisfying, but it might be the best we can do. In the end, this question isn't just about the universe. It cuts deeper than science can measure. It shows how little we really understand about why anything exists at all. Even the tools we use to ask the question, logic, language, thought, are part of the something we're trying to explain. What is consciousness? Consciousness is what makes an experience feel like something. It's the difference between being awake and aware versus being completely unconscious, like in deep sleep or under anesthesia. In basic terms, consciousness is your ability to notice the world around you and reflect on what's happening inside your own mind. You don't just react to things, you experience them. You see colors, feel emotions, think thoughts, and recognize that you're thinking them. That internal awareness is what separates conscious minds from machines, or even many living things. Scientists often break it down into two parts. The first is wakefulness, being alert and able to respond. The second is awareness, not just reacting, but having a sense of yourself and your surroundings. For example, a person in a coma might have some brain activity, but without awareness, they're not considered conscious. The real puzzle comes when we try to figure out how consciousness works. The brain is made of cells and electrical signals. But somehow, out of all that biology, a feeling of experience emerges. This is often called the hard problem of consciousness, explaining how physical matter gives rise to something so personal and subjective. Some researchers think it's all about information. When the brain processes lots of data in a connected, organized way, consciousness might emerge as a side effect. Others focus on specific brain regions that light up when people report being aware. There are also more radical ideas that consciousness might be a fundamental part of the universe, not just a byproduct of brains. So while we can study consciousness by watching behavior, brain scans, or even through artificial intelligence, the exact nature of it is still one of the biggest open questions in science and philosophy. We know we have it, we just don't fully understand what it is. What is the self? We use the word self all the time. Yourself, myself, sense of self. But what exactly is it? The self is the idea of who you are, not just your name or your job, but the deeper sense that there's a you behind your thoughts, feelings, and decisions. It's what gives you a sense of identity across time, even as you grow, change, and learn new things. In basic terms, the self includes things like your body, your memories, your personality, and your relationships. But it's more than just a list of parts. It's how all those elements come together to form a single point of view. A stable sense of me that continues day after day. Psychologists often describe the self as having two aspects. The first is the experiencing self, the part of you that feels emotions, sees colors, hears sounds. It's your moment-to-moment awareness. The second is the narrative self, the story you tell about your life, including your past, your goals, and your role in the world. Neuroscience shows that this sense of self depends on a network of brain functions, especially areas linked to memory, attention, and body awareness. Damage to these regions can disrupt a person's sense of who they are. suggesting that the self isn't a single thing, but a collection of processes working together. Philosophers have pointed out that there may not be a fixed self at all, just a constantly shifting pattern of thoughts and sensations. From this view, the self is more like a stream than a solid object, always moving but still recognizable. So while we talk about the self like it's a stable, single thing, it's actually built from layers of biology, memory, and experience, all working together to create the feeling of being someone. What is the meaning of life? People have asked it for thousands of years. What's the meaning of life? It sounds like one big question, but it actually breaks into a few different ones. First, is there an objective meaning, something built into the universe itself? Or is meaning something we create for ourselves? In religion, the meaning of life is often tied to a higher purpose. Many traditions teach that life is a test, a journey, or a gift, with some kind of spiritual goal or destination. In that view, meaning comes from serving, obeying, or connecting with something beyond human understanding. In philosophy, some thinkers argue that life has no built-in purpose, and that can be freeing rather than depressing. If there's no external meaning handed to us, then we're free to create our own. That might mean building relationships, solving problems, exploring the world, or simply living in a way that feels right to us. Biology takes a more functional view. From an evolutionary perspective, the purpose of life is to survive and reproduce. That's what life forms are naturally wired to do. But that explanation doesn't always satisfy when people are looking for a deeper sense of fulfillment or direction. Then there's meaning as a psychological experience. Research shows that people find meaning through goals, personal values, and feeling connected to something bigger than themselves. It doesn't have to be cosmic. It could come from raising a family, creating art, helping others, or contributing to a community. So when people ask about the meaning of life, they're often mixing together science, philosophy, and personal feeling. There's no single answer that covers it all, but the question itself has guided how humans think, act, and reflect for as long as we've been around. Can meaning be created? Meaning often feels like something you discover, like it's hidden somewhere, waiting to be found. But what if it can also be made? The idea that meaning can be created suggests that it doesn't have to come from outside sources like religion, fate, or universal truths. Instead, it can come from the choices people make, the values they hold, and the way they live their lives. In this view, meaning isn't something we uncover, it's something we build. For example, think of someone who spends years helping others in their community. There may not be a cosmic reason behind their actions, but over time, their work becomes meaningful, both to them and to the people they've helped. That meaning didn't exist beforehand. It was created through experience and intention. Philosophers like existentialists argue that life doesn't come with built-in meaning, and that's not necessarily a bad thing. It means people are free to define meaning for themselves through relationships, creativity, learning, or simply by how they respond to life's challenges. Even in psychology, research supports this idea. People who report having a strong sense of meaning often describe it in personal terms, raising children, caring for others, or dedicating themselves to a cause. These aren't universal truths. They're human experiences that become meaningful through time and effort. This doesn't mean meaning is random. It often forms around things that matter deeply to us. But it does mean that meaning doesn't have to be handed down from above. It can grow out of what we choose to care about, how we spend our time, and what we decide is worth doing. So rather than being a fixed answer, meaning can be seen as an ongoing process, something people shape, develop, and carry with them throughout their lives. Does suffering have a purpose? Pain, loss, stress. No one enjoys suffering, and yet it's something every human experiences. So the question arises, does suffering have a purpose? Biologically, suffering serves a clear function. Physical pain signals that something's wrong. It keeps us from touching hot surfaces or putting weight on an injured limb. Emotional pain works in a similar way. It can point to broken relationships, unmet needs, or harmful situations. From an evolutionary standpoint, suffering helps us survive by pushing us to avoid danger and correct course when things go wrong. But beyond survival, suffering can also shape behavior, identity, and perspective. People who go through difficult experiences often report learning from them. They may develop resilience, compassion, or a deeper appreciation for life. For example, recovering from a serious illness might not be good, but it can lead someone to prioritize health or relationships in new ways. In psychology, this idea is known as post-traumatic growth. It doesn't mean suffering is desirable, but it suggests that hardship can lead to positive changes in values, purpose, and inner strength, especially when there's support and time to heal. In many belief systems, suffering is tied to moral or spiritual development. It's seen as a test, a path to wisdom, or a reminder of what really matters. While not all people agree with that perspective, it reflects a long-standing human effort to make sense of pain. Still, suffering isn't always productive. Some forms, like chronic illness or deep injustice, bring more damage than growth. That's why most approaches to suffering involve both learning from it and reducing it wherever possible. So while suffering itself isn't a goal, it often has effects that reach beyond the moment. It shapes how people grow, connect, and find meaning, even in the hardest parts of life. Do we have a soul? The idea of a soul has been around for thousands of years. It's the belief that there's something inside us, beyond the body and brain, that makes us who we are. In most religious and spiritual traditions, the soul is seen as the core of a person. It's the part that feels, thinks, and lives on after death. Some believe it's immortal. Others think it moves on to another life. But in all cases, the soul is treated as something separate from the physical body. Science, on the other hand, looks at things differently. Modern neuroscience sees thoughts, memories, and emotions as the result of brain activity. Damage certain areas of the brain and parts of a person's personality or memory can disappear. That suggests what we call the self might be tightly tied to physical systems, not something separate floating inside us. Still, the idea of the soul hasn't gone away. Some argue that consciousness, the fact that we experience anything at all, can't be fully explained by biology. They believe there must be something non-physical behind it. Others say that what we think of as a soul could just be the result of complex brain functions, culture, and a desire for meaning. There's also a middle ground. Some see the soul as a metaphor. It doesn't have to be a literal, invisible entity. Instead, it could represent the essence of a person, their values, character, or inner life. In that view, the soul is real, but not in a supernatural sense. So whether the soul is a separate thing, a biological illusion, or a symbolic idea, it's one of the oldest attempts to understand what makes a person more than just a body, and why we feel like there's something deeper inside us. Are people inherently good? When a child shares a toy or comforts a friend, it's easy to believe that people are naturally good. But history, behavior, and psychology offer a more complicated picture. The idea that people are inherently good suggests that kindness, fairness, and empathy are built into us from birth. There's evidence to support this. Studies on infants show that even very young children show signs of compassion and can distinguish helpful behavior from harmful. Evolutionary biology also supports the idea that cooperation gave early humans a survival advantage. Helping others made groups stronger. But being good doesn't mean being perfect. Humans also have instincts for self-preservation, competition, and fear of outsiders. These traits aren't evil, they're protective, but they can lead to conflict, selfishness, or cruelty, especially when people feel threatened or powerless. Whether someone acts in good or bad ways often depends on environment, upbringing, and context. A person raised in a caring, secure setting is more likely to trust others and show empathy. But under stress, in danger, or influenced by group pressure, even well-meaning people can behave in harmful ways. Philosophers and psychologists have long debated the question. Some argue that people are born good and learn bad behavior from society. Others believe the opposite, that rules, education, and culture are what guide people away from harmful instincts. In reality, human nature seems to be a mix. People come into the world with the capacity for both care and harm. What they choose depends on a range of factors: personal values, emotional control, social norms, and life experience. So rather than being purely good or bad, people are complex. Most are capable of both and spend their lives navigating that balance, one decision at a time. What is death? Death is something every living thing eventually faces, yet it remains one of the most difficult concepts to fully understand. At its most basic level, death is the end of biological life. It's when a body stops functioning. No more heartbeat, no brain activity, no breathing. From a medical standpoint, that's what separates someone who's alive from someone who's not. Cells stop working, systems shut down, and the body begins to break down. It's a biological event, and for scientists, it marks the final stage in an organism's life cycle. But death isn't just a physical process. For most people, it also carries emotional and philosophical weight. Losing someone often means more than just the absence of their body. It means the end of shared experiences, conversations, and presence. That's why death can feel more like an emotional absence than a scientific event. Different cultures and belief systems approach death in very different ways. Some view it as a transition to an afterlife, a continuation in a different form. Others see it as a natural final chapter, with no continuation beyond memory and legacy. Both perspectives shape how people mourn, celebrate, or prepare for death. On a psychological level, the idea of death also forces us to think about time. We make plans, set goals, and build relationships knowing that life is limited. That awareness changes how people live, often giving urgency or meaning to everyday moments. In practical terms, death also plays a role in how societies operate, through things like wills, funerals, or legal definitions of life and personhood. It's not just personal, it's deeply social, touching everything from family to law to medicine. So while the body may stop, the idea of death keeps going in the lives and minds of those still here. What is time? Time is something we all move through, measure, and feel, but no one can quite pin down what it actually is. In everyday life, time seems simple. It ticks forward, 1 second after another. You wake up, get dressed, eat, and go about your day. Clocks and calendars help keep track, but they don't explain what time is. They just measure how we experience change. At its core, time is a way of organizing events. It separates what's happening now from what already happened and what's still to come. Without time, everything would just happen at once, or not at all. But time isn't just a human invention. It's built into how the universe works. In physics, time is often treated as the fourth dimension, alongside the three dimensions of space. Together, they form what's called space-time. According to Einstein's theory of relativity, time doesn't move at a fixed rate. It actually stretches and compresses depending on things like speed and gravity. For example, time passes slightly faster for someone on a mountain than for someone at sea level. Then there's the mystery of why time seems to have a direction. We remember the past, but not the future. Eggs break, but they don't unbreak. This forward flow of time is tied to a concept called entropy, the natural tendency of systems to move from order to disorder. It's one reason why time feels like it only moves one way. Some physicists think time might not even be fundamental. It could be an emergent property, something that only appears when certain conditions are in place, like temperature or pressure. So while we experience time as steady and familiar, it's actually one of the most puzzling features of the universe, more than just minutes and hours, and far from fully understood. Why do we dream? Every night, when we fall asleep, our brains don't just shut off. They start running a completely different kind of show. And dreams are one of the most mysterious parts of that process. At the simplest level, dreaming happens during a stage of sleep called REM, or rapid eye movement. That's when brain activity becomes more intense, closer to how it looks when we're awake. During this stage, people experience vivid images, stories, and emotions that we call dreams. But why does this happen? One major theory is that dreams help us process information. Throughout the day, we take in a massive amount of sensory input: faces, conversations, problems, worries, and the brain needs a way to organize it all. Dreams might be a byproduct of that sorting process. As the brain strengthens important connections and clears out the less useful ones, strange combinations of memories and emotions can show up in dream form. Another idea is that dreams let us simulate situations. Just like a flight simulator helps a pilot practice, dreaming might help us rehearse how to handle danger, conflict, or complex social situations. Even if the scenarios are bizarre, the emotional rehearsal might still be valuable. Some researchers also believe dreaming helps regulate our mood. If you've ever had a stressful day and then woken up feeling a bit more balanced, it might be thanks to the emotional processing that happened in your sleep. There's no single answer that fully explains dreams, and they likely serve multiple purposes at once. What's clear is that dreaming isn't just random noise. It's a built-in part of how the brain works. Messy, strange, and still not fully understood, but deeply tied to memory, emotion, and learning.